So I'd like to introduce our first speaker. Dr. Seidl is a geography and GIS scientist who loves to help students effectively capture, produce, analyze, display, and communicate geographic data. She's passionate about incorporating ethics into geography education, and her scholarly research centers on geoprivacy. She was named a 2019-2020 Ethical Geo Fellow by the American Geographical Society to develop an educational toolbox on short films on geoprivacy. So with that, Dr. Seidl, if you'd like to share your screen, you're welcome to begin.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and happy GIS Day to everyone online and in person at the University of Idaho. I'm thrilled to join you today to talk about one of my favorite topics in GIS, which is geospatial ethics and privacy. I'd like to take this opportunity to reflect on a recent developments according to a text that came out almost 20 years ago to the day. The text Spying with Maps by Mark Monmonier was an influential text in geoprivacy covering a variety of developments in geospatial tech that were occurring in the late 90s and early 2000s. This book has great chapters including overhead assets, eyes on the farm, Tinder, technology and tactics. And as such, it's not just a call for attention to geoprivacy, it's a celebration of the GIS that has gone into these developments. And in the spirit of GIS Day, I think that's important to remember as we delve further into our topics on ethics and privacy. So Monmonier's approach to this book, Spying with Maps, is one of wariness grounded in understanding. So unlike fellow GIS scientists of the day, this book is one that approaches geoprivacy with some caution. And it's not a book that is meant to use scare tactics to scare people into not adopting these technologies. It's one about understanding the risks. And so this is one of several avenues for engaging with the public on geoprivacy that I'd like to chat about with you today. Overall, this talk will review the technologies that were in place in 2002 when this book came out and examine the geoprivacy forecast from there on out. Then I'll review the surprises in location data collection that we have today. And third, I'll review the approaches to geoprivacy engagement that we as geospatial professionals can make. All right, so the first set of technologies that were discussed in Spying with Maps, one of the main technologies was the advancement in satellites. At the time, Digital Globe's QuickBird had just been launched in 2001 that offered panchromatic resolution of 61 centimeters. Today, we know this company as Maxar and are currently offering 30 centimeter resolution for a cost. Also common at the time in 2002 was the use of the French satellite system Spot Image, which offered 10-meter resolution. And while not available to the public, the US spy satellite's Corona system basically allowed for 3 inches of resolution on the ground. So certainly today we have far more satellites in orbit than we did 20 years ago, often offering higher resolution. Another portion that Monmonier reviews in Spying with Maps, and one that he celebrates in particular, is the open fields doctrine as it relates to aerial imaging, satellite imaging, and drone imaging. The open fields doctrine relates to the Fourth Amendment's protection against unlawful search and seizure. And the last full ruling on this, in particular, as it relates to aerial surveillance, was in 1986 with a case called Dow Chemical Company versus the United States. The background behind this was that the EPA had hired aerial survey firms to inspect a Dow plant for violations of the Clean Air Act. When it went to the Supreme Court, the court ruled that there was no reasonable expectation of privacy in the open fields between structures. And this is something that allows for continued aerial surveillance today. This is something that Montminier celebrated greatly because it didn't stifle innovation in satellite and aerial technology. One of the main concerns at the time, 20 years ago, was the development of data warehouses to store personal demographic information. Montminier says, if you think the federal government is Big Brother, guess again, meaning that companies were posing the greatest risks to geoprivacy with the granular level data being collected about individuals. Montminier warned that marketers were thirsting for finer details on individuals, and in particular highlighted a few data broker companies, including Axiom and DoubleClick, for collecting such granular data. This concept was also discussed widely in the context of a term called data valence, which refers to this intensely linked set of databases highlighting and connecting the location data between individuals. Montminier says, if you don't see the danger, think integration, the imminent ease of linking a large number of databases reliably and rapidly, a concept that has only seen greater and greater use in the last 20 years. One of the technologies that wasn't covered as much in this book has been drones and UAVs. In fact, the one reference in Spying to Maps to the use of UAVs was the use by the Pima County, Arizona Sheriff's Department of an unmanned aerial vehicle to scan for drugs. And Montminier characterizes this use as not necessary to investigations. Today, we have the proliferation of UAVs, not just for surveillance purposes, but for an incredible industry of agricultural and other kinds of research related to land cover. One of the areas where Montminier is spot on is the growing technology of facial recognition. Montminier warns that there would be the problem of misidentification if the databases did not contain enough faces to make this a viable technology, and that the usefulness of facial recognition would hinge on accuracy. And this is certainly something we're seeing today with the reports of bias in facial recognition. Montminier says that this facial recognition technology is something that would be cost effective, particularly in airport screening, which today we see rolled out more and more as your face becomes the ticket for boarding an aircraft, particularly for international flights. And one more technology that was starting to come into its own at this time around 2001, 2002 is GPS and location-based services. And this is related to the removal of selective availability in the early 2000s. So the removal of the introduced error to GPS data. And Montminier predicted a healthy location-based services industry eager to sell location at a higher resolution. He also predicted the use of digital fencing and digital leashes to monitor prisoners for in-house incarceration. And this is something that, again, is playing out very strongly today. However, there are some surprises that we were unable to predict 20 years ago. And one of these is the extreme proliferation of mobile phone location. This diagram comes to us from a New York Times report in 2019, in which the Times gained access to granular mobile phone data from an inauguration and Women's March in 2016, 2017. And you can see in this diagram how individual level mobile phones were tracked not just at a point in time, but for their trajectories heading to and from Washington, DC. Now, this is data that we have access to for a cost that is routinely collected and traded by many data brokers. And we'll be discussing a bit more about that to come. Another surprise that isn't quite covered in Monmunir's book is the use of cell site simulators for surveillance. So the cell site simulator, also known as a stingray, is operated by governments and some companies to act as if it is a cell phone tower so that people's cell phones connect to them, and then the content of SMS and voice calls can be intercepted. This mobile phone data is available not just to government or to certain sets of companies, but is actively traded between a vast network of data brokers. You can see in this image that I've brought up here, there is a company called Iris that promises raw GPS data collected at an hourly cadence, collecting and curating high quality GPS signals from millions of connected devices worldwide. Scanby promises data and hourly updates from 35 million US mobile phones. And another company here also promises GPS location data on several million consumers in the US. A common claim of these data brokers is that the locations are anonymized, but you can see here that anonymized location information they're saying is simply latitude and longitude to 5 decimal point precision. Now, personal trajectories and GPS points can be easily reconstructed and attached to identities. And so this promise of anonymity happens to be a false promise. Attention to our mobile phone data came into play, especially in the last several years when we were thinking about how to do contact tracing, how to see if individuals were complying with stay-at-home regulations. And a particular location company called SafeGraph came into the spotlight for its device counts of stay-at-home behavior by block group. And you can see that this is a data set that used to be fairly available and well integrated with Esri products. For this pop-up that you see here, SafeGraph estimated that in that block group, there were 80 devices that they were tracking. 34% were staying at home, 10% of devices were showing part-time work behavior, and 9% were showing full-time work behavior. Clearly, this necessitates not just location collection at a point in time, but continued monitoring of personal trajectories and classifying that at an individual level, even though we see it aggregated here. Back to spying with maps, Monmunir actually advocated for opt-in requirements for data brokers, for data warehouses. And he recognized that this recommendation would come at the dread of data vendors looking to make profit off of granular, high-resolution location data. And he realized that opt-in requirements for sharing of such location data would be a difficult sell. And so the solution, if there were to be no opt-in requirements, was for individuals to take it to their own level and either leave their phones at home or turn them off. And so this is something that has certainly changed in culture over the last 20 years. It is, with our reliance on cell phones, it's very unlikely for individuals on a daily basis to leave their phones at home or turn them off. But we certainly have ways of masking our locations. Instead, what we have in our current location ecosystem are some areas where we're able to opt out. And this is very much related to our topic for today at the University of Idaho GIS Day, geoprivacy. And I think it's fair for us to define this as the right of individuals to determine the extent to which their location is shared with others. And this is a definition for geoprivacy that we've seen pop up post spying with maps, but much more frequently in 2006, 2011, 2012, so about 10 years ago. And this definition of geoprivacy puts agency into the individual to protect my own location data, that we have a sense of control over it. Certain laws have been passed at the state level around the country that enable some degree of control over this data broker industry collecting our location information. But the setup is not one of opt-in, it is a setup of opt-out. And one of the most powerful geoprivacy laws and regulations has been the California Consumer Privacy Act. And in this act, there is a running list of data brokers, and consumers in California have the right to contact these data brokers to figure out what information is being stored about them. They have the right to delete personal information collected from them, the right to opt out, and the right to non-discrimination for exercising these rights. Now, I came to Colorado. I'm a professor at Colorado Mountain College, and this is my third year here. And I had most recently moved from California. So before I moved in 2020, I put in 50 petitions to different data brokers to get my data under the California Consumer Privacy Act. And I can tell you that this is a challenging process. This is a time-consuming process. And out of those 50 data brokers that I petitioned, I was ultimately only able to obtain my data for one. And it happens to be the company that Monmonier references the most frequently in spying with maps. So Axiom is the name of that company. Most of the setup for accessing your personal location data and other sensitive information from data brokers is a set of portals that you need to jump through and a set of questions that you need to confirm about yourself. And you can see my email trail here just for Axiom for obtaining this data. So generally the process is you put in a petition, the company reviews your petition and asks you to confirm personal details about yourself that they have stored in the database. So the questions they ask are about your known associates. So who not among your family members have you been spending time with? What are your previous addresses? Where did you go to school? What is your education level? And as you're going through, you need to confirm this, basically validating the data that are in these repositories. And I can tell you that in some of these data broker setups, I was unable to get through because the data broker had incorrect information about me. So in the multiple choice questions to confirm my identity, there was incorrect information. And because I had no correct answer, I was denied access to my data. So Axiom is the one where I was able to pull this out. And finally, what I received from Axiom was a 30-page document, including many different codes of what kind of consumer information was being collected about me and where these data were being sold to. So the last 5 pages of the document showed which of these data points were being sold to different categories of vendors. So you can see here that Axiom sold my personal data to government, including personal identifiers, personal characteristics, personal property, buying activity, geolocation, employment, education, and inferences about me. And these same data points were also sold to insurance companies, to healthcare, and to security contractors. There were many, many more categories, but traditionally, these are the most alarming to those who are caring about privacy. Now, you might be interested in what kinds of inferences and what kinds of income data were being captured. So here's a look at some of my actual data. And I should say that most of this is linked to a household. So it's not the data that's just linked to me individually, but to who is considered part of my household. So you can see raw numbers here in 2020 for household dollars spent on apparel, charitable donations, dining out, education, and how many months it has been since I placed an online order, what types of online orders I placed. All of this linked to my previous addresses, my education level, my voter status. And what I'm not putting up here is going to be my income modeled, my income produced assets, my ratio, my liquid assets, my net worth, my charitable contributions, children, marital status, and discretionary spending. One of the concerns of the 90s and early aughts with regard to data warehouses such as this was the idea of segmentation into lifestyle groups. And you can see here on the right that Axiom put me into certain groups of consumers, including connected bohemians, fast track families, metro mainstream, and upwardly mobile. And so all of the concerns about user segmentation into these somewhat stereotypical groups is still alive and well. Now, this is not a set of data that's easy to access. This is something that you would go to the list of various data brokers, put in your petition, and then it is a months-long process to obtain this data. What I was most looking for was going to be my granular location-based mobile phone data, but that was not presented in this repository. Now, not all of this data is behind the scenes being bought and sold between various entities, but we also tend to use it as we are moving about our daily lives. The mobile phone data is what's behind when we see a location in Google Maps is busier than usual, less busy than usual, and we may start to make our decisions around it and go to a store at a time that we know that it's not busy based on this proxy of mobile phone data. Now, none of this is to scare anyone. We are conducting here a celebration of geospatial technology. And so at this point, I'd like to talk about the second avenue for engagement with the public on geoprivacy issues. So the first avenue was Monmonier's avenue for engagement, which was wariness grounded in understanding. So really a celebration of GIS. The second approach to engagement with the public is one that stems back from concerns in the 90s about over legislation of the geospatial industry. And so ANSRUD in particular, ANSRUD, Johnson, and Lopez in '94, when they wrote one of their formative articles on protecting personal privacy in GIS, they took a stance that was somewhat anti-legislation and being proactive about our role as GIS practitioners to set the rules, to set the professional ethics. And so our second avenue for engagement is to avoid restrictive legislation by not setting off what's called a privacy panic, but instead taking proactive steps in our professional communities to protect privacy. And so at this time, we also saw the development of various GIS codes of ethics. One of these is the ERISA GIS Code of Ethics, which takes a very positive tone, very deliberately seeking to avoid specific unethical acts in GIS, but to commit yourself as a GIS professional to ethical behavior. Some of the tenets in the Code of Ethics label privacy specifically. So protecting individual privacy and especially sensitive information. And in particular, being careful with the combination of various data sets and linking individuals between them to avoid that in a data minimization principle. Also related to this is respect for individual autonomy. So allowing individuals to opt out of being added to a database, being able to correct themselves in a database and remove themselves from a database, echoing very nicely or echoed by the California Consumer Privacy Act. Another more recent development has been through American Geographical Society's Ethical Geo Initiative in conjunction with Benchmark. And this is a set of guidelines or founding principles called the Locust Charter. And this is a group of organizations that have committed themselves to ethical principles for location data collection and analysis. You can see here that among these founding principles are to minimize the data collection, minimize intrusion, protect privacy, do no harm, and address bias in location data that are collected. The third avenue that we have here is one that was really shied away from in the 90s and early 2000s, and that is the use of scare tactics to encourage individuals to care about their location privacy. An example of a scare tactic might be the popular show on Netflix, Black Mirror, in which we see a variety of almost doomsday privacy scenarios played out that are at once realistic, but also terrifying. And as part of my work as an ethical geo fellow, I also developed a set of educational videos on privacy that are somewhat under this category of scare tactics to encourage individuals to care more about their personal geolocation data. And I was going to play one for you now, but when I tried to share the sound, I didn't have that ability. So I might just stop sharing for a second and see if I have the ability to share sound on this. So let me go ahead and try that. Okay, no, those buttons are still disabled for me. But let me see and you can stop me if this isn't playing sound.
Yeah, it doesn't appear to be playing sound, Dr. Seidl.
Okay, thank you. So I can just, as it is playing in the background, I can just tell you a little bit about what's going on in it. So in general, this is a fake ad for a location company that sells its services to employers vetting prospective applicants. And the idea is that the hiring agency will adopt this company to track the applicants' phones so that when they are being vetted for hire, the potential employer can see whether they've been engaging in risky behavior, like visiting bars late at night or other questionable location links. And so this is a video that's part of the Geoprivacy Education series I developed with, oops, sorry about that. Okay, let me bring that back up here. All right. With Ethical Geo. And this is a series of about 8 videos that all come with questions and activities for students to engage in geoprivacy research. So you can see here the activities and follow-up for this video are to really grapple with the concerns of how we use location to vet potential employees. So example is, if you read that Locust, that's the name of this company, this fake company, is a requirement to interview for a position you are interested in, would you still apply for the job? Why or why not? Would you participate if you are notified of the start and end times of the location tracking? Would you participate if you were paid to have this installed on your phone? And also to have students make a list of potential false identifications of risky behavior that might take place just by relying on location data. So an example being, if someone is working at a location late at night that might be part of a bar or a part of or next door to one, this is a potential for a false identification to be made of this problematic, risky behavior. Okay, back to our idea of spying with maps. One of the opening lines of this book is that privacy and mapping are 2 words that rarely share the same sentence. After all, what do most of us have to hide that anyone would want to map? This is a bit of a tongue-in-cheek example of some of the pushback that one would receive when speaking out about geoprivacy issues. It's called the nothing to hide argument. And it's the idea that I don't care about location privacy. I'm doing nothing wrong, so I have nothing to hide. And this notion has been debunked again and again. And we can, in general, one of the arguments is that if it limits the scope of geoprivacy to only being about what's legal or not, and only illegal activities are what's worth being hid. And that's simply not true. Privacy involves the freedom of self-expression, the freedom of dignity, and mostly it's built on a series of small disclosures that, adding up over time, can lead to biases and denials of service. And so the third approach we have when we think about using scare tactics to encourage individuals to care about geoprivacy is what agency do individuals have to hide their own locations? And we're going to see some of this concept played out, especially when Dr. McKenzie later today talks about some of his recent approaches to personal location masking, which is allowing people to obscure one's personal location data. So as you think back to all the opportunities that you might have to share your location data, certainly there are times when you yourself have opted to obscure it in some way. And several years ago, I did a study in California that examined people's propensity to mask their location data. And I did this in several ways. So the first way was to recruit hundreds of survey participants that were then asked to provide their home locations. And there were two ways that they could do this. The first way is to enter it in a series of fields, much like you would when filling out a retail request. And as you fill out those forms, you do have the choice. Are you going to provide correct information? And how precise is the information you're going to provide? And then participants also had the option to correct or move a point on the map to either move it towards their actual home locations or away from their home locations. And then they were asked, how honest were you about this location data you just provided? And so this study was done in two samples. One was a postal-based sample and another was an online open sample. We found similar levels of personal location masking between them. So far and away, our online sample opted to minimize the precision of address that they provided. So 43.6% of those participants did not provide in those field boxes a ton of location data. They probably just provided a city or a state or a zip code and not their full address. About the same percentage between samples admitted that they provided incorrect address information, so about 15%. And 10% admitted that they moved the map pin on the map deliberately away from their home locations, an example of personal location masking. And so part of the purpose of this was to get a sense of how pervasive location masking was and how it might impact or bias any types of studies that would come out of asking people to provide their personal location data. Other types of masking looked at were the propensity to mask IP address by using a VPN. This is something that was significantly more prevalent among our online sample and particular male users of VPN. And we also looked at the propensity to provide an incorrect address to retailers and to turn off location services on the phone. And so about 20% of both samples reported that they usually keep location services off on their phones. And then, not surprisingly, about 15% of those people currently had their location services off on their phones. And so this is our third set of thinking about engaging with geoprivacy concepts. Overall, since Monmonier's book was published 20 years ago, the biggest change to location data collection, perhaps the biggest surprise, has been the pervasiveness of mobile phone data and the granularity and frequency of location capture. We have a set of approaches that we can use to protect geoprivacy. One of these, and probably the most effective, being legislation. Another approach that we talked about has been self-regulation within the geospatial industry and the development and adherence to codes of ethics. And the third is our individual resistance to location collection, and that is activities involving personal location masking. And as we celebrate all of our wins in GIS, as we celebrate new technologies, I'd encourage us to take a chapter out of Monmonier's book and adopt a measured wariness as we celebrate these wins, and to take an understanding of both of the benefits and the drawbacks of pervasive data collection. And so I wish you all a very happy GIS Day. If you're looking for more information on my videos and educational resources, I have provided the link in here. And with that, I'd be happy to discuss further and answer any questions.
Okay, thank you very much. So yeah, we have a few minutes for questions. Anyone in the room or anyone online through the Q&A session? Does anyone have a question here in the room? We'll start here first. Anyone? Someone? One back here. We'll start back here. All right, hang on just a second.
Yeah, hi, thank you for that. When you showed us your Axios report, a lot of the bins that you were placed in were used words that someone may want to be characterized as, cosmopolitan, upwardly mobile. I guess I'm wondering if you've seen anyone's data, their less ideal characteristics are described, and how people like that are generally characterized if they have a lower income or buy too many tchotchkes or what have you.
Yes, absolutely. That's a great question. And so, yes, I did personally only put in the nice categories for myself, but there were some in there for me, including a monetary striver, other categories like guns and ammo, categories including, I've seen a bunch that are, as you say, not as kind, especially for lower income classifications. And so that's where the real argument has been against this use of stereotypes and negative stereotypes across different classes, across different groups. So I was selective in the ones that I used, but you can see these segmentation groups not just in the Axiom data, not just in the lifestyles reports, but there are also similar segmentation groups that you can see in Esri's products if you look under some of the business analyst data.
Okay, thank you for that. Maybe time for one more question in here, or do we have it? We have one more question on site, and then we'll check online.
Hello. My question was about the guys who wrote the thing in '94 arguing for, ethics versus legislation. Do you think they might have changed their argument if they'd known what was coming in the next, 20 years or so, as far as cell phone data stuff?
That's a great question. As far as I know, ANSRED has maintained that GIS professionals should be the first and last word on regulation for their industry. But I would venture to ask them whether that has changed. I don't personally know if their strong claim has varied over time, has wavered. But I imagine it has.
Okay. Any questions online, Felix? No, we're good there. Okay. Thank you very much for coming to us from Leadville, Colorado this morning. And that was really interesting, brings up a lot of great information and sets the tone for, I think, the rest of the day. So we really appreciate it, Dr. Seidl. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so we're going to take a 20-minute break. Folks online, we'll be back at it's 10:20 local time here, Pacific, before our next session begins. Just a couple of things real quick for folks on site. There's a raffle we'll do at lunch. So there's raffle tickets out front. So if you want to fill out a raffle ticket, please do that. Secondly, I'd like to certainly thank our committee. Many of the folks who are here today who have made it possible for us to host this event and all the work they've done. Just a quick mention, Lisa Jones here from Plant Sciences, Dr. Jason Carl from Forest, Rangeland and Fire Sciences, Jeremy Kenyon here from the library, Felix here from Earth and Spatial Sciences today, and Perry from the library, and Evan Williamson from the library. So I'd like to recognize all of them. In addition, our sponsors, and you'll see this information online. In addition to the library, Alta Science and Engineering has provided support, as well as Northern Rockers chapter of ERISA, Century Dynamics, EcoPoint, and Avista. So thank you to all of them very much. So let's take a short break. We will be back at 10:20 for those folks online and in person, and enjoy some snacks here in person, and hopefully have some snacks online that you can enjoy.
Or I guess just going to do some testing real quick. Hold on. Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Maddie Murphy. I'm with the International Studies Department here at U of I. I've recently specialized in something called open source human rights investigations. That is to say, human rights investigations which rely almost entirely upon digital sources as opposed to on-the-ground sources using free-to-use platforms and software. While most of my research is actually more focused on the international law side of things than the human rights law side of things, and I'd be more than happy to talk about that a little bit. Because such investigations rely on technologies that are almost entirely based on publicly accessible geolocation technologies, I thought it might be beneficial just to use this presentation mostly as a means of just situating everyone with how these investigations are conducted in the first place using geolocation technologies. Such investigations are being conducted by a wide variety of organizations, news organizations like Bellingcat and the New York Times, human rights NGOs like Amnesty International, and even by private individuals operating in their own capacity. And to that end, the ethical implications of these investigations, which are relatively new, really only beginning in 2015, are manifold. But because our time is relatively limited here, I'm just going to be focusing on the technical aspects of one such investigation. That being said, at the end of my presentation, I've tried to program for a few minutes. If we have some time, I would love to answer any questions you might have. So to begin, this incident I'll be covering occurred almost exactly 2 months ago in a conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan. To radically oversimplify things, Armenia and Azerbaijan have been in conflict over their borders since the fall of the Soviet Union. This has led to a great deal of violent conflict over the years, most recently just this last September, when Azerbaijan moved to claim territory which has up until a few months ago been held by Armenia. At the beginning of this October, a disturbing 40-second video started to be shared widely on social media channels, which seemed to depict 9 Armenian POWs who were summarily executed by Azerbaijani forces. Bellingcat, a news organization which bases all of its investigations on open source methodologies, began investigating the incident to answer 3 fundamental questions. I'm just going to be answering the first one here, which is where did the incident take place? They also answered when did it occur and who was involved. Because the video is highly disturbing, I'm not going to be playing it for you here. However, these stills kind of give you an idea of what the footage looks like. Essentially, a group of what appear to be unarmed men surrounded by a number of armed individuals. At around the 17-second mark, the armed individuals opened fire and killed the unarmed individuals. Both before and after, loud commands in Azerbaijani can be heard to not to shoot, and then after the shooting has begun, to stop shooting. Investigations occurred almost immediately after the footage surfaced on October the 1st. Both on Twitter and on Telegram, rumors began circulating that the execution might have occurred close to the border between the two countries, near a body of water called Kev Lake. But these were only rumors until a number of photos surfaced during the investigations, which were initially posted on September the 13th when the conflict began, of dead Armenian soldiers who appeared to be the same ones who were depicted in the footage. Ultimately, it was a comparison between the photos and the videos using a number of objects, and you can see some of the objects highlighted, which are the same. The footage is on the left, and the pictures are on the right, and you can see that they match very closely. And this is ultimately what led investigators to conclude that these were indeed the same event. Then, by isolating the slope of a hill found in both the pictures and in the video, investigators began to search the area around Kev Lake in Google Earth, just using Google Earth and searching, and they were eventually able to find the exact hill, as can be seen in the bottom right. Using this information, they basically drew a line straight from the hill towards the direction of the camera in both the photos and the video, just using tools built into Google Earth. And this eventually led them, oh no. I'm supposed to have like a GIF here, but I don't think it's going to play. Long story short, they were able to identify the hill exactly. That's such a shame. Oh well, it's really interesting. But they were able to just use a line function in Google Earth, and it drew directly to where the hill was. I don't think. Oh, there we go. Okay. Yeah, I'm just gonna let this play out. But again, a lot of these investigations are just done through Google Earth. Like, just people who are really good at Google Earth and spend a lot of time there are able to just use the functions inbuilt into the system. And you can see that matches the footage pretty well. After this, investigators were able to use compared images made by Google Earth and images made by another Earth imaging service called Planet Labs. The images from Google Earth were in 2019 or 2018, and these are when the investigation was conducted. And you can see that there's been some human activity, probably the creation of a military outpost. But finally, to ultimately confirm the location, investigators used a really useful piece of open source technology called PeakVisor, which is basically a system which, if you upload a photo or video, it'll try to extract metadata from those photos or video, and it'll try to locate where it was taken and try to identify mountain ranges in where the photo was taken. If that's not possible, if there's no metadata, it can you basically just input a location, as investigators did here, and it'll basically provide an outline of any mounds or hills in the where it was sourced. And as you can see, it matches up really, really closely with the video. So that's essentially how investigators were able to geolocate where the footage was shot. I'm going to briefly go over how it was chrono-located, how they figured out what time it was. Essentially, it was just a question of identifying where the sun was located in the photos and videos, and using a really useful piece of software called Suncalc, which generates a lot of different kinds of data based on a lot of different inputs. Investigators can also, this isn't something that Bellingcat did for this investigation, but you can also use shadows if it's, this is particularly useful in places like the Middle East, where shadows can be really, really distinct in photos or videos, and you can basically just input the height of an object generating the shadow and calculate the length of a shadow, and from that you can calculate the time of day. It's really, really useful in the toolbox. And then finally, to identify who, as I mentioned earlier, Azerbaijani was used in the footage, the Azerbaijani language. So the investigators probably knew that Azerbaijan was involved in this, but they actually also used really interesting research, which is exactly what it sounds like, Camopedia, which is this like a Wikipedia, but for camouflage patterns. And Bellingcat also independently confirmed this with a camouflage expert. There's a lot of talk in the international community right now about how to respond to these executions. There's a number of lawyers representing the families of victims involved who are petitioning the European Court of Human Rights. There's not been a lot of progress on that. Ultimately, a lot of this relies upon the cooperation of Azerbaijan, and that's not something that's necessarily guaranteed. I haven't really gone over what are like the legal or ethical implications of these investigations, but that's really where a lot of my research is based. Part of the reason I did that is because there's actually not a lot of hard law that's been passed in the international community regarding digital open source investigations. Like the closest thing we've come to is something called the Berkeley Protocol, which was passed, or not passed, but it's basically a protocol that's been signed by a lot of people involved in the community. Like 4 months ago, very recently, that kind of outlines how investigators should approach these things, but not at all giving guidelines for states or other actors. So that's really my presentation. I would love to answer any questions you might have if you have them. But sorry, I don't know if I have time either. I want to be considerate, but if there are questions, barring none.
The Berkeley Protocol, like what type of international institution, like passed this?
So the Berkeley Protocol. So UC Berkeley is really prominent on these issues. They're really the only U.S. institution that talks about open source human rights investigations, and they partnered with the High Commission for Human Rights. So the UN is really, I mean, I can get into the weeds if you want to, but the UN has a lot of different actors involved with this, and a lot of them are saying a lot of different things. But the High Commission for Human Rights worked with the Berkeley Protocol, the UC Berkeley, as well as a lot of academics, both in the US and abroad, to kind of come up with guidelines. And the Berkeley Protocol hasn't been signed by any states. It's just academics and the High Commission that are kind of working on it. So there's not a lot of binding, there's no binding language in the Berkeley Protocol, but it's basically just guidelines for the moment. But
any other questions?
Great, thank you, Maddie. This is fascinating. I just, maybe it's just a very basic question, but there is, I mean, it's fascinating the application of these new technologies, but there's also these like there's this family resemblance with, sort of surveillance state types of, in ways that images, videos can be taken up in very problematic ways. So, I mean, that's a big question, and that's more of a question to, talk about over coffee or something.
I mean, it's just interesting because all these investigations are done by individuals, and you can see like the methods they're using are very easy. Like it's something like I am not a GIS person. Like I kind of came into this on the back end, and I don't have a lot of knowledge. And I can use a lot of these systems. So you imagine, especially in places like China, and this is like that's a really big question right now. Is with the resources of massive states, it gets really, really complicated really quickly. But yeah, it's also. I mean, the point is like there's good aspects and bad aspects to these digital investigations. You can bring individuals to justice sometimes, but sometimes it's just research and nothing really comes out of it. But anyway.
Just a question I have. You don't have to respond to this, but it's curiosity I have is how the human rights defenders and these independent actors sort of address that issue and respond,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and that's what's interesting about this is there's not a lot of action, and there hasn't been a lot of comments yet internationally. So because it's so new, like it really, Bellingcat, this news organization that does open source investigations, started in 2016 investigating Syria, and they were really the first actor involved in this. And so there hasn't been a lot of, there's just nothing there really. So it's a really interesting issue. But anyway, thank you so much. This is really interesting.
All right, our next presenter will be Kara Utter from Northern Rockies EURISA.
Thank you. I can also just type them in too. Wow. So I feel like I'm a little out of order there in the sequence because I'm gonna totally take a left turn. I'm gonna go way out in left field right now, actually. I'm deviating not only from the topic that was just discussed, but also kind of from the focus of today being the geoethics. What I'm here to talk about as a representative of Northern Rockies EURISA is the benefit of getting involved in the GIS community. And I know that all of us in here, we're all from different walks of life. We're at different stages in our career, but the benefits of getting involved in the GIS community can actually come at any point in your professional career. So one thing that I'd like to ask is, how many of you feel that you have been involved in some way in the GIS community throughout your career? Well, there's a good number. Yeah, okay. So how many of you have heard of Northern Rockies EURISA? Okay. How many of you have heard of EURISA or EURISA International, a smaller number? How about the NWGIS, Northwest GIS Users Group? Okay, so this will be good. I'm going to introduce a lot of you to a couple, like a community that can be very beneficial and supportive for you throughout your GIS career. So when it comes to EURISA International, they're now being referred to as EURISA. There was a board vote. They are an international organization, nonprofit, and they have chapters all over the world. They've got chapters in Canada, the Caribbean, they have partner organizations in Australia, and they have 13 US chapters. The Northern Rockies chapter of EURISA is Idaho's EURISA chapter. So as the Northern Rockies chapter of EURISA goes, we're an organization that provides support to GIS professionals through providing workshops, providing mentorship, providing an Intermountain GIS conference every other year. How many of you have heard of the Intermountain GIS conference? That happens every other year in Idaho. So a small number. So we actually put on a conference to help provide support, networking opportunities, workshops, learning, education, presentations, all of these things every other year in Idaho. We try to go in the next one will be in 2024 in Northern Idaho. We just collaborated on the EURISA NWGIS Northern Rockies EURISA GIS Pro International Conference that came to Boise. How many of you went to the Boise GIS Pro Conference? A few of you. Okay. So when it comes to getting involved in the GIS community, how many of you in here are students or young professionals? A good number. Okay. I mean, it's a good number. So what do these GIS groups do? They give you a network of colleagues. They give you a network of colleagues that you can go to if you are wanting to get into a certain industry, but maybe you don't know how to broach that industry. The network of colleagues can put you in touch with somebody who is in that industry. If you are a young professional or a student, a lot of these organizations will provide scholarships for educational opportunities, as well as get you involved in different leadership academies or networking to find mentors, or also resume help, job search help, cover letter help. Many of the GIS community organizations give free workshops, and this can be at anybody at any level. I mean, all of us, those of us who have been in GIS for a while, we've had to transfer. Maybe not all of us have gotten there, but you have to go to ArcGIS Pro someday. You have to leave ArcMap. And so a lot of these communities will provide free workshops on how to move over to ArcGIS Pro. And some provide, let me see, meetups and mappy hours. So this is where it gets fun, right? You go out and you go to a mappy hour and you meet up with other GISers, other GIS professionals, and you just start to build your network and you talk, you talk shop, you talk about issues you might be having, and a lot of times people will be able to help you take the next step in whatever issue or project you're having. You might learn something, and that's one of the big benefits of getting involved in the GIS community. So I wanted to, as an anecdote, tell my story to show how the place I am now, I just launched my own business. It's been very successful. I could not have gotten to where I am without being involved in the GIS community and making all of the connections I made along the way. So back in 2015, I had just graduated with my master's, and I took some time off. I went and I drove a forklift for a season in Antarctica, and then I came back home, and I felt that I was still a newly graduated student, even though there had been a 6-month hiatus after I graduated with my master's. So I knew the GIS Pro Conference was coming to Spokane, and I applied for a student scholarship. Even though I was no longer a student, I pled my case that I still felt like I was newly graduated. I didn't have my foot in the field yet, and Northern Rockies ERISA provided me with a partial scholarship and allowed me to go to the conference in Spokane, which was wonderful because at that conference, I brought my paper portfolio and I walked around to try and find mentors. I found some people who have ended up being great mentors, and the first thing they told me was to put my portfolio online. And then they told me to apply to the ERISA Vanguard Cabinet of Young Professionals. This is a Vanguard Cabinet is a great opportunity to find GIS-based leadership within the community and also to make a lot of connections. And so that's what I did. I applied, I got accepted, and over the next couple years, I helped plan conferences, and at these conferences, we focused on planning young professional and student events and networking opportunities, and also tried to really get to the root of what young professionals in the GIS community need and want. And this was a really great experience. So even though I had no clue how to be on a board, how to be on a committee, I just jumped in and I said, sure, why not? So then I was contacted by Northern Rockies ERISA sometime around 2016, and they asked me to help on the conference planning committee. No idea what I was doing, but I said, sure. So I started attending the phone calls, learning. I introduced the concept of a young professional meetup to take place on the Sunday before the week of the conference. And when this conference did end up happening, this young professional social did end up happening. And I met a man who owned his own business, saw that I had ArcGIS Online experience, and he contacted me, and I've been consulting with him since 2016. So this was just through attending a conference, getting involved, making a social happen, and then connecting with the GIS community. So over the next couple years, I found a job in local government. I joined Northern Rockies ERISA as the treasurer of the board, which I've been doing for almost 6 years. And by 2019, I decided I needed to take a step back. I am on way too many committees. I'm just going to focus on Northern Rockies ERISA and my job in local government for a couple years. So after I took a break, took a few deep breaths because I really jumped in strong there, and you don't have to do that. But I told him I would be back, and I was. So in 2021, I got back into ERISA, the international parent chapter of Northern Rockies ERISA, and I joined the NG 911 task force, which we planned and put on the first ever LEAP conference, which is the Locational Enterprise Addressing and Public Safety Conference. It's been virtual, but it will be in person someday in the future. If any of you are interested in public safety and NG 911, it's a really great opportunity to connect with like-minded individuals in that realm. And I also accepted the co-chair position for the GIS Pro conference in Boise that came. And from being on this conference, like I said, I just recently left my job in local government to start my own business. And my very first project as Dynamic Visions GIS came from a man who was also on the GIS Pro Planning Committee. He saw he saw my drive, my commitment to the GIS community, and he also saw that I had it's the ArcGIS Online experience again. And so he contacted me, and I was a part of his team that filled out an RFP, and we were approved. We won the bid, and it's been a very successful project. And then I also started attending Women in GIS. The Women in GIS, anybody in here, have you heard of the Women in GIS national organization? Yeah, so this is an organization that just puts on different virtual events and topics. Arizona chapter is the most active chapter and the one I get the most involved in. But I started attending different meetups and community mugs and mornings and different socials virtually that where we just talk shop. We talk about our projects. We talk maybe through some issues. And so it's just another access point to GIS professionals who maybe you can ask questions to, learn something from. Maybe they can ask questions to you, learn something from you. And one of them contacted me, and we're doing a consulting project for the city of Phoenix. And so there's just, let me see, half of my consulting clients, which equates to more than 50% of my income, have come from just simply getting involved in the GIS community and attending conferences and just getting to know the GIS community as a whole, working with these different organizations. So if you think that volunteering or attending events that come out with these different user groups and nonprofits is a waste of time, then I really want you to rethink that. Rethink just how much the GIS community can support and boost you throughout your career. And if you have been in the field of GIS for a long time, then you could potentially be a mentor for somebody else. And that's also something to think about. No matter where you are in your career, we all know that GIS is a technology that is always evolving. There's always something else to learn. There are way too many things to be an expert in all of them. And that's also where getting involved with the GIS community comes into play, because everyone has a different focus. And so you can always reach out, and somebody will know somebody who can help you find the right way. And that's actually all I came to talk about today, is how important it is as a representative of Northern Rockies ERISA. So if you haven't gotten on the GIS listserv, how many of you have heard of the listserv, the email listserv? Oh, goodness. Okay, I'm going to send an email to Bruce and have him email all of the attendees. The GIS listserv for Idaho is a listserv which tells you about all of the upcoming opportunities for education or workshops, job opportunities. People like me will also use the list to ask questions and say, hey, I'm having an issue with this. Has anyone experienced this? And there's always somebody willing to respond back and help out. And so if you're not on that GIS listserv, I highly recommend that as well. And that is where Northern Rockies ERISA does a lot of our communications for the events and workshops that we put on. So I didn't end up going to any of these websites, but ERISA.org, nrerisa.org, those are some websites that maybe you want to look at. So thanks.
Are there any questions for Kara? I'll just ask a quick one. So these organizations you mentioned, what size membership do they have?
So Northern Rockies ERISA, like I said, we put on a conference every other year here in Idaho for GIS professionals. And whenever somebody attended those conferences, they automatically became a member. So we had maybe around 200 members on our mailing list. The conference is pretty well attended normally. And then for ERISA International, there's thousands. Because there are chapters, like I said, all over. Canada's got 3, the Caribbean has 1. There is a Caribbean conference annually, right? GIS in the Caribbean, why not? But yeah, so there is a big group of people to network with. Oh, there's a question back there.
How to spell ERISA?
So ERISA stands for Urban and Regional Information Systems Association. So it's URISA. You're welcome.
On the website for GIS Day, there's a link.
Thank you very much. So our last speaker for this morning short talk session is Jennifer Hines from University of Idaho, and she's presenting remotely.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. I was going to take that silence as a yes. So good morning, everyone. My name is Jennifer Hines. I am a research applications architect with research computing and data services here at University of Idaho. RCDS develops web and mobile applications for a variety of research projects at U of I and beyond. We are often asked by researchers to build web pages and specifically web maps displaying geospatial data in the form of points, polygons, and raster images. And rasters, such as geotiffs, can have very large file sizes, making them challenging to render in a web browser. Now, this is where cloud-optimized geotiffs save the day. Let's see, there we go. So this audience is likely familiar with TIFFs and geotiffs, so I'll keep this slide brief. TIFF stands for tag or tagged image file format. TIFFs have been around for about 30 years and are used to store generally high quality raster graphics and associated metadata. A geotiff is basically a TIFF with georeferencing information embedded within the file. So it's embedded with such things as the coordinate system or the map projection and so forth. Geotiffs are commonly used to store such things as satellite data and satellite images and aerial images, such as this Landsat 7 image that I've included on this slide. So what are cloud optimized geotiffs? This is a kind of a wordy definition. COGs are geotiffs with an internal organization that supports efficient access via HTTP GET range requests. Now that's kind of a mouthful. So let's break this down into the two complementary pieces of technology. Regarding the internal organization, traditional raster image storage is row by row, as indicated by the green path descending from the top of the left image. COGs store images tile by tile instead of row by row across the entire image. You can see that the image on the right is divided into 16 tiles. So in a web or mapping application, only the tiles covering the area of interest need to be read by the screen. Another form of internal organization is the use of overviews. Overviews are simply downsampled or low resolution versions of the original image. These downsampled versions are loaded to the screen when you're zoomed out, because loading the full resolution image would simply just be overkill. It's completely unnecessary. Overviews are also called pyramids, and this graphic is just another way to visualize overviews. Each layer in the pyramid covers the same geospatial extent, but the resolution decreases as you zoom out or move up in the pyramid. This illustration actually also shows tiling. The last technical detail I want to mention is regarding regarding COGs is that they support HTTP GET range requests. So what does that mean? The HTTP 1.1 protocol, which has been around for about 8 years, allows clients to request only the byte ranges or parts of the file that they need. Now, COG files take advantage of this protocol, so there's no need to download the entire file. Now, this is a hugely efficient way to serve up content. So the example that I want to show you involves displaying on a web map ortho imagery captured with a drone. This past summer, the RCDS team collected about 1,000 images out at Parker Farm, which is on the east side of Moscow. We then stitch those images together to create an orthomosaic with approximately 15 centimeter resolution. The resulting geotiff is about 500 megabytes in size, which is way too big to render on a web page. That is, until it is cloud optimized. So how do we create a cloud optimized geotiff? Creation of a COG is super simple using the Geospatial Data Abstraction Library, also known as GDAL. GDAL is an open source translator library for raster and vector geospatial data formats. With GDAL, COG creation is really just two steps, those first two bars on the slide. The GDAL Addo utility can be used to build overview or downsampled images. You specify a resampling algorithm, which in my case, I'm using averaging. The list of numbers that you see there, 2, 4, 8, 16, and 32, those are the overview levels that you are requesting to build, where 2 is an overview that is half the resolution of the base layer. So 4 is a quarter the resolution of the base layer. The next step is to run GDAL translate, where you specify a set of options for the geotiff, like compression, tiling, and the use of overviews as were created in the previous step. And, you know, that's it. That creates your cloud optimized geotiff. You can verify that your file is in fact a COG using a validation script, of which there are several to be found on the web. I've just listed one example that's using a Python script. Okay, so as for displaying a cloud optimized geotiff on the web, there are many tools that can do this, but I'm just going to list 2 here. These 2 are open source JavaScript options, Leaflet and Open Layers. I really like Leaflet because it's easy to use, it's lightweight, and it has a good assortment of plugins. The plugin GeoRaster Layer for Leaflet introduces a custom class that allows you to load a COG. Open Layers has more functionality than Leaflet, but it does have a steeper learning curve. So for this example, I'm going to show you a Leaflet map. So hopefully this will run. Give it a second to get going. I did a screen recording of my browser to show the responsiveness of a 500 megabyte cloud optimized geotiff in real time. I'm using Leaflet to render the map and load the COG. You can see the raster resolution increasing as I zoom in. I think it might run through one more time. So it's pretty fast. It's very responsive. Okay, whoops. So to summarize, I think COGs are pretty awesome. They make rendering large rasters efficient, while Leaflet makes COG display on a website very easy. That example that I just showed, that was a Leaflet map with a COG, and I only used about 30 lines total of HTML and JavaScript. So it's very simple to build a web application that displays these really large data files. If you're interested in learning more about cloud optimized geotiffs, here are a couple of references. The one on the left, codegeo.org, has numerous links to just about everything that you can imagine about cloud optimized geotiffs. That's why I've included this one as opposed to providing a list of many others, because you can go here and you can find out tons and tons of information. Also, I've included the link to learning more about GDAL. I haven't worked with it a whole lot, but it seems like it's quite a powerful tool for working with raster imagery. And with that, I will conclude and open it to any questions there may be.
Do we have any questions for Jennifer here in the room? Anything online? So I'll ask a question that might be way off base here, because I've not used but heard of Google Earth Engine as something that kind of can, as like cloud computing. Can you maybe make a connection between the cogs and that?
I haven't really worked with the Google engine much, probably not really at all, actually. I think with what they may utilize this technology of this HTTPS GET request stuff for loading large image files as well as what I presented. Cogs are something that are used, ArcGIS can read them, QGIS can read these files. I'm not sure about the Google engine, but I think the probably one of the big things that is a plus with using the types of tools that I outlined is that pretty much anybody can do this, right? Like it's very fast to develop. If you're a researcher and you want to just like build a quick web app to show what research you're doing, you don't need to go to the trouble of requesting accounts through Google or any hoops that they may provide to that might make it a little bit painful to kind of get the work done that you need done. This is stuff that you can it's all open source, very simple to set up. And you can very quickly start to work with these large data files. So yeah, so I can't really answer your question because I haven't worked much with the Google engine, but those are just some comments.
Okay, we have one question online.
Let's see.
All right, from online, thanks for the interesting talk. How easier is it to integrate with the drone imaging processing with the web app?
Integrating imagery processing with the web app. That is a good question. I think depending on your processing, your data processor, your image processor for drone imagery, for instance, we use something called WebODM. I don't know for sure, but I suspect that can produce imagery that then can be cloud optimized, because their interface, it's like you can do the processing, but then you can immediately go to looking at your imagery, and it tends to be quite responsive. So I think there's probably there are some tools out there with drone image processors that might allow for exporting of cogs. If they do not, like I said, to convert a geotiff that you might create with your drone data collection, converting that to a cog is, if you have access to GDAL, it's 2 lines of code. It's super easy.
Any other questions? All right, let's thank Jennifer again. And we have another short break before our next speaker at 11:20.
These guys need to switch it up. Oh. Okay, I think we're almost there here. Just had to get things switched around a little bit. Okay, there you are.
Perfect.
And okay, I think we're good to go, Grant. I'll just do a little intro and
Great, thanks.
yeah. All right, everyone. Let's get started on our next talk here. We've got the pleasure of having Dr. Grant McKenzie with us. He's an assistant professor of spatial data science at McGill University in Montreal. And he's going to talk to us today about an application called Privy2. And so, Dr. McKenzie, take it away.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate the invite, and I'm happy that we can do things actually via Zoom as well. And I'm happy to follow Dara's talk this morning. So in good company in terms of the geoprivacy topic. I'm sure she's given you an overview of her work in that domain. So yes, I'm Grant McKenzie. I lead a lab called the Placial Analysis Lab, similar to spatial, but focused more on place as a concept. And we're based out of McGill in the geography department there. I'm not actually in Montreal right now, though it is, I think, snowing right now in Montreal. So kind of happy to be on the West Coast for a little bit. But today I wanted to talk about Privy2, an application that we've been working on and I've been designing for a little while now. And just to give you a background on sort of why we developed this. We've seen a ton of discussion about privacy in general over the last several years. It's not a new topic, and geoprivacy as well. But it's becoming slightly sort of skewed. Different approaches are being taken. Different ways have been used to examine geoprivacy, and especially as we see technology changing, adoption of social media technologies and or tech, geosocial. So from the news media, probably remember this from I think 4 years ago or something now, when a military base was accidentally identified using Strava data, where people on the military base were going for a run, and they would actually share their location via Strava, and it exposed where this military base was. We see more sort of local discussions about this, or timely discussions about applications like Snapchat, for instance, turning off the heat map functionality in the Ukraine. So like examples of situations where social media and applications we might not often think about actually having an impact on exposing people's private location and where they're going and what they're doing. We've seen more recent discussions, given the outcome of Roe versus Wade, on social media applications and major technologies like Google realizing that they have to do something or offer some services or some changes to how they currently do services. So location data is playing a big role in societal discussions, as we know from a GIS and geography perspective. And then we see this example that came a while back with people's mobile phones being used to identify them. And I think this was, for a lot of people, a little bit of a wake up, realizing that there's no real way to get away from your location being shared or people having access to your location. If you use any kind of technology, your cell provider, your credit card provider have access to this kind of information and can be used in some way, right? So location privacy is something that we need to consider in a lot more detail and have a bigger, broader discussion about what this actually means. So there's wide discussion or view on geoprivacy research being done in so many different aspects of it. One of the things that was really interesting to my team and myself is looking at specifically location privacy as it relates to the individual. So the individual that wants to share their location with a friend, family members, publicly, however they want to do that, but they want to maintain or continue to control their location information, privacy of their location information. So we looked at a lot of the tools that exist out there for doing that, and there's not a lot of them. All these applications allow you to share location information, but have some control over that location is where a lot of these kind of fall short, right? So we can think of Google Maps as an option, right, where you can turn on location sharing and you can share with an individual or a subset of individuals. So you can choose a few friends you want to share this kind of information with, but it shares specific pinpoint location, your blinking blue dot of where you're located, shares that with Google, and then Google shares that with your friends or whoever you're choosing to share it with. Facebook has their check-in ability, so you can check into a business. Same with Instagram being part of the same company. You can choose a specific point of interest that you're at and tag your Instagram post with that location. You can also share locations via the messaging service if you want to. And then we see sort of more geocentric applications like Swarm, which is part of Foursquare, which allow you to sort of gamify. You check into certain places and you compete for mayorships or points and these sorts of things. And you can share your location through them as well. The difficulty with a lot of these approaches, right, is they make this assumption that how you choose to share your information, the relationships you have with individuals is irrelevant, right? So all your relationships are going to be the same, right? So, I'm Taylor and I'm sharing my location with Morgan, or I'm turning around and I'm sharing my location with the public. I don't have much control over what type of information gets shared or the level of resolution or scale at which that information is shared, regardless of who I want to share this with, or if I want to share this with family members, or friends, with coworkers or the public. I have really that one option, right? Is I can share a social media check-in, or I can share my location via Google Maps, but there's not a lot of ability to configure or control what kind of information I'm sharing. And I'm often forced to share this through a third-party application. Right? So a company like Google or Facebook or some of these larger companies that we know are for-profit companies, right? And use this information, data brokers or however they want to, for advertising purposes or other purposes. Now, I'm not saying one way or another if you agree with that or not, but that's just the reality of the ecosystem we live in for sharing location data. As I mentioned, like the big interesting part to us was this acknowledgement that our relationships are all very different, right? The kind of information I want to share with my family is going to be very different than the kind of information I want to share publicly or maybe with my coworkers. And this extends to location information as well, right? I might want my family to know the exact pinpoint geographic location where I am, but I might want my coworkers to know the neighborhood that I'm in, or my public to know the city or state that I'm in, right? Or certain applications to have a rough, 100 meter, 1 mile buffered area that they know that I'm in. So having some control over that information, and not just spatially, but temporally, is where we saw this ability to contribute to this discussion on personal location sharing. The way we did this is we came up with this idea of sort of putting together these design goals for any application that is interested in personal location sharing. What should these applications be able to do? What should these design goals consider? And we basically said any privacy preserving location sharing platform should allow users to do 3 basic things. Right? So you should be able to obfuscate your location, meaning you control what level of detail your location is reported at. That means you can mask it in some way, you can completely hide it, you can turn it off, you can turn it on. You have control over the level of detail that your location actually uses when you share it. The second thing is you should be able to encrypt your location data, right? So encryption is a big part of any privacy preserving security application, right? So the ability to make sure that somebody in the middle of the sharing doesn't have access to your data would be a big part of this. So being able to encrypt your location is one of our design goals here as well. And the last one, which might seem kind of obvious, but actually can get a little bit tricky, is the actual sharing of your location, right? So if you have a location sharing application, you should be able to share your location. But how you choose to share that location, I think, is a point of discussion, right? Whether you choose to share location publicly or you share it with certain individuals, the method of doing that is up for discussion. And so this is what we thought of as being principles that any application, ours included, and we put together a prototype of an application we think would be useful here. Application that exists out there should follow these same design goals, at least our recommendation. So going through each of these in a little bit more detail, what do we mean by obfuscation? Typically, when we talk about obfuscation, we're talking about geomasking. We're talking about spatial data, right? So there's a whole suite of geomasking tools that exists out there for basically anonymizing your location to some degree. And we typically talk about spatial resolution or scale at which you're recording this information. And this can be anything from some point geometry that is actually stored stored or recorded or shared based on some movement or adjustment of your location around some radius, right? And the typical approaches here use kind of a donut option, where if I'm actually at the building in the middle, don't want to report building, I can actually obfuscate it by some radius and have a donut-based radius as well. So an inner and outer polygon that allow us to report your location anonymously, so to speak, pseudo-anonymously. You can report it just by some buffered radius that is adjusted based on some randomized centroid that is guaranteed to include your actual location, but still reports it at a level that is unidentifiable at the sort of city block or city building level too. So all of these have a trade-off, right? And then lastly, some ability to report it at some social or political boundary, be these neighborhood boundaries, census tracts, wherever. There's been a lot of work in geomasking techniques, specifically for health-based data and GIS data. When we look at socioeconomic, demographic data reported to census tract, census block group, or whatever you might have. So geomasking techniques are not new. Just the ability to choose your geomasking technique when you anonymize or obfuscate your data is something that we think is important for including privacy applications. Encryption is a big one for this as well, right? And I took this graphic. You can see the link below. It's your kind of standard example, single key encryption approach. So you have some plain text that you might enter. You use a key, which would be a string of characters to encrypt this information. It shows up as a mess of text that is impossible to read. And then you can decrypt it with the same key. Now that key gets shared through some other means, be it passing it as a note in person or sending it a text message via Signal or some other application, to allow somebody to decrypt information that you've encrypted. There's a lot of work in encryption. Obviously, this is one of the most basic approaches to understanding encryption methods, but having some ability to do this, and in this case, this is text, but we would do this using location information to encrypt that information in order to share it publicly and then decrypt it by an individual that has a key. And then the last one is the sharing aspect of this. Now, when we talk about sharing, as we mentioned before, you can have like a Google Maps based approach where you share your location with a single person, right? You've chosen to give that person a window or access to your location for a brief period of time, your location at that pinpoint geographic coordinates. The alternative approach that we're proposing here is to basically, once you've encrypted your location information, you can share that publicly. Right, I could put that string of sort of gobbledygook characters on my website, or the QR code representative, right? So QR codes are payday due to the pandemic. So we could have a QR code representation of that, or we could have the encrypted string that I just continually update and publish to my website so that anybody can see my location, except it's encrypted. So only people that have the keys can actually unlock that. And so our approach to this is to share that information publicly, because any point somebody choose to unlock it if they had the key, rather than having to force somebody to specifically target individuals and share that information at certain times. The alternative approach we're taking is to say, well, let's control the keys. Let's not control the encrypted information here. So to accomplish all that, and getting to the sort of more applied discussion about this, we've set up our design goals of how we think we could approach any kind of privacy preservation application. We proposed this application, a prototype called Privy2. So privy2.me is our website. There's currently a mobile web version, or a web version that you can access, and we're in the middle of hopefully coming out with the Android and iOS versions in the next month or two. But this application is basically an applied version of these design goals. So actually putting them into practice and seeing if we can actually do something that is useful and relevant to people. So you have an application that looks like this, at least if you were to open this on your mobile device. You can choose to log in. If you want to create an account, you can do that as well. Or there's a button there that says share once. It doesn't require any kind of login. You can just share your location once. The approach for the obfuscation aspect of this, individual, meaning how you share information, this location views perspective. So we have multiple views of your location, right? Your location doesn't change. You have a latitude and longitude, at least in our representation of your geographic coordinates of where you are. But how you actually obfuscate that can happen in different ways. And you can have multiple views of your obfuscated location, depending on who the target audience is for that location information. So I might have my location reported at the provincial level in Canada or state level in the United States publicly, right? So anybody can see my location at the state or provincial level publicly. I want my friends to see this report 1 mile radius around my location. And I want my family to get the exact pinpoint location that I'm specifically at. And the application allows you to choose from any of these obfuscation methods that's of interest to you. Pick a view, control that view in some way, and then determine who it is you're actually going to share that information with. Now, how you actually determine that is based on the key, right? So each of these views has a unique key that you apply to it. So publicly, I might choose to share my location at the provincial or state level. That requires no key. Anybody can see that location at any point. That's publicly available data. It's actually not encrypted at all. I could also have multiple other views, one for, again, my friends here or my colleagues, where I give the key Chewbacca, let's say. So any friend of mine that has the Chewbacca key, unlock my location at that 1 mile resolution whenever I choose to share my location. So I'm constantly sharing my location. They, at any point, can go to my website, get the latest encrypted data, unlock it, and see where I'm at. Skywalker, if I'm following the Star Wars reference, if I'm sharing this with my family, they can unlock my pinpoint location, the exact geographic coordinates where I'm located, and see what I'm doing at that point, right? So far less obfuscation associated with that. We also included the ability to obfuscate your time, right? So we know that space doesn't exist in its own sort of bubble. It's a spatial temporal aspect to this. What we do in terms of our habitual behavior in times of day actually tells a lot about where we are and what we're doing. But I can actually obfuscate my location in some way. I can put a temporal buffer around my location and report it at the year or the month to control some of that information as well. And then I can publish that information, right? So I can, when I hit the publish button, my location views are bundled up, they're sent to the server, they're all encrypted, or at least the ones that I've chosen to encrypt with a key, and then provided with a URL, right? So if I'm logged in or signed in, or if I have a single use, I get a randomized key for my single use. And if I'm logged in, I get the actual username that I'm logged in with to actually share that location. So I can share that URL however I want. That contains the information associated with my location. What that actually looks like if someone goes to that URL is, this is my public view. This is what I chose to not encrypt, that people can see the province that I'm at, right? So they can see that I'm in Quebec in Canada. It's no temporal information is provided. I've chosen to hide the time that I shared that information. But I can go in and actually add my key, right? So if I have a key and I'm a friend, I can enter Chewbacca, and it will unlock my location at that sort of, I think it's 100 or 1,000 meters. So it's a 1 kilometer circle containing my location that's been adjusted in some way. And if I have my family member and I have the key for Skywalker, I can unlock the location at a very specific point, right? So same information, just obfuscated in different ways and unlockable with different keys. If you're more interested in how this sort of looks from a data perspective, you can actually just append a JSON string to the URL and actually look at the JSON that's actually being saved and shared. And what we see is there's 3 different views, right? So it's a GeoJSON object for the published unencrypted data. And you can actually see it as just straight GeoJSON there in green. And then the other 2 views are actually in red, right? So the ones in red are the ones that are encrypted. They don't make much sense. In order to actually see where you're located, you have to decrypt those using the key that you have access to. And then there's obviously a QR code that contains all this data as well. Getting data, you don't want to have to hit that URL. The raw data is actually just stored in a QR code that you can see too. How this actually all works, right? So the obfuscation and the encryption actually all happens on the device. And that's part of the interesting part of all this, is that anything that's stored on the server is the encrypted information. So none of your location information is actually being shared via third-party devices or anything, because it's encrypted on your device, then sent to the server and stored, it's pulled off the server by somebody that requests it, and they decrypt it on their device. So nothing is actually being transferred to and from the server in terms of the keys. This is a combination of Postgres and PHP. I'm sort of an old school PHP developer, so I developed it using that. And then on the device or on the website, if you load this through a browser, you see that we use a variety of libraries, Crypto.js, Turf.js, which is a fantastic library for those interested in geo and anything to do with JavaScript. Leaflet, the open source version for mapping, though we are moving to Mapbox for the actual iOS application, and jQuery mobile for any kind of mobile manipulation or object manipulation on the device as well. Our next steps for developing or building this out are to, we're building this using React Native. So some of you may have heard of React Native or Flutter, which is the Google project to actually create native mobile applications using a single code base. And so we have versions of those. I have a couple undergraduate students that are helping develop that. Additional geomasking techniques, so not just the techniques I talked about today, but actually points of interest or check-ins, allowing for those to be adjusted. We have some work on actually integrating this in the base Android code. So rather than Google asking you for your course or your find location, imagine a third option where you could actually mask your location in some way and report that to Google. If I'm looking for restaurants in a city or in a neighborhood, I don't need to give Google my latitude and longitude. I could give them the rough region that I'm at in terms of whatever radius I choose to give that kind of information. And then sort of one of the difficulties with any of these things, and we're realizing with distributed ledger systems, is that if privy2.me goes down, then the whole system goes offline. So if we could have some sort of decentralized storage where your actual information is shared in a decentralized way through some distributed ledger, it'd be a much more efficient and better way to handle a lot of this data. Sort of summarizing, coming to the very end here, there's one other thing I want to mention. This is kind of difficult to do in this audience, but this application actually still exposes your location to a third party, if we think about this. And I want to kind of ask how and why, and maybe there's not really an option to get an answer to this, so I'll give you the answer. But if we think about what still exists in the application, that even though everything still exists in the browser, and it's being encrypted there and shared with the server, there's still some information you're actually sharing with a third party. Now, the information that's actually still happening is through the map tile server, right? So a map tile server, you have your latitude and longitude, that your location is determined based on your GPS fix. It just exists on your device. But then you have to request to Google Maps, Carto, however you do that, through the tiling server, the actual map tiles, if you're using a raster or vector tiles that you want to return back to the device. And so the tile server actually gets a request for data at a certain latitude and longitude from a certain IP address. So essentially you are giving up personalized information there. But one of our approaches right now is to look at caching these tiles specifically on the device, or having an anonymized tile caching system. So you can actually request tiles from multiple cities and actually only use one of them that is of interest to you. So that's one of the areas we're taking this. Privy2.me is the application. If anyone's interested, we'd love to get your feedback and input on this, test it out, let us know what you think. Just a really interesting project from our side. This is not just me doing this work. Obviously, any researcher has a ton of great resources working behind them. I have an excellent group of students that are doing this work, and an excellent group of funding sources that are allowing us to do this. So I'm just coming up to the end of my time here, and I wanted to thank you very much for having me today. I really appreciate it, and enjoy the rest of your GIS day.
Well, thank you very much, Grant, for that very interesting presentation. We have time for questions. If anybody, we've got a couple of questions. Do you want to just come up to the mic there? That'd be great.
Hi, I'm actually curious about who your target customer base is with this application.
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a little bit of there's a combination of things. One is typical academics just trying to find an interesting way to do some geoprivacy work. There's a couple other application target sort of people or parties we were interested in targeting. Like if you're an individual interested in sharing your location, you're working as a journalist in a country where you maybe don't want your location being known, you have to share this kind of information with friends, family, your editor, whoever that might be. This is an application that allows you to do that, right? So you could copy some of the URLs here, share them via Signal, and have somebody have access to your location constantly, right? So this could constantly being updated. We could also look at specific countries where if you're of a certain, gender identity or sexual orientation, it might be illegal or dangerous for you to have that known in a certain country or a certain part of the world. And so if you're attending some event, or you're going to a bar somewhere, or you're going to something where it might be frowned upon, or there could be other issues related to actually exposing your location, even through a company like Google. This is an application that is completely decentralized in terms of not associated with any of these bigger companies, and your information is entirely within your control. So that was one of our sort of main focuses or foci, to actually offer these tools to a sort of a different sort of option than what currently exists out there. So it's a kind of a proof of concept, but also a question on, we want people to take back control of the actual information they're sharing.
We have another question.
I think you might have hinted at this, but for the geospatial location, have you thought about doing an offset? Because I know a lot of times when you're looking at that bubble, a lot of times you go right to the center of it, and you're going to get real close. So have you thought about doing like a point offset that maybe the user, or even a random offset that the user could use?
Yeah, it's a good point. And I didn't probably explain that well enough. And that's actually is what we do. So you provide a radius, so like 1 kilometer, for instance. And what we essentially do is your current point gets buffered by a random value between 0 and the radius that you specified, and in a randomized direction. So some azimuth that you choose, that becomes your new point, and then that gets buffered, and that's what gets reported. So it's guaranteed to include your location, but the actual centroid is randomized anywhere around the potential location that you could be at. But it absolutely is an important thing to do, and there's a lot of really interesting work on that. I mean, some of what we've reported here is fairly basic in terms of our geoprivacy or masking techniques. There's a lot of information related to the socioeconomics and demographics of populations, right? So still, if I'm reporting my location on an island, it doesn't matter how much I kind of move that or randomize that location, I can still figure that out pretty easily. So we haven't really considered contextual information. We purely looked at the spatial coordinates, but it is a good point that needs to be considered when you're doing this kind of work.
Are there any other questions? Okay, go ahead, Barry.
How might this application work in a one-off situation where you might want to provide your colleague or friend levels with your exact location and then revoke that access later on?
That's a really good point. Then something that we actually, so there's answers to that question. One is there's no way for us actually to revoke access to your location once you've shared it. If you've shared it once, you've given them the key to unlock it, and then you no longer want them to have access to that original shared location. We can't revoke the key. We can only revoke the key for future updates. So that is a limitation of this, and that once somebody has access to the key and that data has been encrypted, they can always unlock that encrypted location with that key. We have no control over that. All that we can do is actually in a later publication of your location. So if you're choosing to continually update your location, you can go into your location views, remove that single location view that had that key, or change the key for that location view, and any future updates that get published, they would not be able to unlock that because they would no longer have the correct key for it. But it is a good point that, you know, historically shared data someone cannot be removed from having access to that location.
All right, we're just about out of time. Is there any other questions from anybody? Okay, and it looks like chat, there's no questions there either. Okay, all right, well, thank you very much, Dr. McKenzie. Can we give him another round of applause?
Thanks very much, and the rest of your day, and enjoy lunch. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, it is lunch. I heard them coming in. Hopefully there's food in the back, but if not, it should be here shortly. Oh, there is. Okay, great. So have at it.
All right, so welcome to GIS Day Part 2, and we have a number of sessions here this afternoon for you folks. And we're starting out with another session of short talks. We have 3 presenters here with some really interesting and diverse group of speakers. One thing I did want to do quick first is Bruce gave thanks for all of the organizing committee, and let's actually give a round of applause for Bruce, who's pulled this together for many years. And with that out of the way, we can get to our speakers. So our first speaker this afternoon is Matthew Steinwurzel with the Fish and Wildlife Sciences at the University of Idaho. And he's going to be speaking on developing a method for quantifying the thermal and hydrological aspects of beaver habitat using thermal infrared imagery.
And you should be good to go. Thank you. Thank you, Evan. Thank you, Bruce. Thanks to everyone who has put on this event and all your hard efforts. My name is Matthew Steinwurzel. I'm a current graduate student here at the University of Idaho. I'm going to be talking about my grad research here, and hopefully we will have some time for questions at the end. I'll do my best to keep this under 10 minutes. So my grad research utilizes thermal imagery to analyze the impacts that beavers have in 2 contexts, a natural setting and a restoration setting as well. So our project is funded by USGS, specifically the 104B Water Sciences Program. In addition to myself, our project collaborators and principal investigators include Dr. Jason Carl and Dr. Brian Kennedy. We're also working with the Nez Perce tribe on this project as well. So traditionally, how we thermally map watersheds for the benefit of wildlife and fisheries has been traditionally reserved to in situ measurements through loggers. This has presented spatial and temporal barriers to this type of data and how we actually map this type of data. Over the years, however, unmanned aerial systems, here and referred to as drones, have advanced exponentially in technology. Drones have become lighter. The type of sensors that we use to gather data have diversified, and we are able to address some of these spatial and temporal barriers. We're able to fly at lower altitudes, turn on a tighter radius, and we can measure high resolution data of large spatial scales. So traditionally in the wildlife and fisheries world, manned aerial craft surveys to conduct surveys of habitat and species inventories are traditionally used. However, we argue that these types of surveys that we're presenting today stand to provide advantages to this type of survey methods. So we collect data through a process called photogrammetry. Photogrammetry quite literally means collecting photographs of the subject scale and using those photographs to derive certain statistics and information about that landscape area. So in our instance, we're using forward-looking infrared imagery or FLIR imagery. And what this allows us to do is create a thermal profile of certain watersheds that we are mapping. So through this process of photogrammetry, we are able to correct and calculate flight paths according to our study site, employ our drone, and collect a series of photographs to thermally map that watershed. So once we have a photography, depending on the size of our study area, the number of photographs can range anywhere from 600 to 1,400 photographs. And we are able to render those photographs together through the modeling process. We use a software called Agisoft Metashape to do so. And we have found that Agisoft is quite adept at handling FLIR imagery and rendering thermal models as well. So once we render these models, we can actually perform an analysis for statistics, including topography, slope, and in our context, temperature data as well. What you're seeing here is a digital elevation model of one of our 2 study sites on the headwaters of the Little Salmon River over down in McCall. However, through this process, we have come to realize that The sensor in which we capture temperature data needs to be calibrated, of course. At this time, we have inferred that we are deriving surface value water temperature trends. However, across both study sites, we have a way to calibrate our temperature data using in situ temperature loggers, traditionally done in a thermal mapping context. We also use what's called thermal ground control targets. So these targets are quite literally black flexi-seal and a holographic material, and have been designed here in our lab. And they stand out quite apparent in our thermal imagery. There's an example that you can see here to the right. And so we measure these targets using real-time kinetics to derive specific locations, which can render and improve model accuracy. Since we are collecting this data with a radiometric thermal sensor, each image has metadata baked into that respective image. So we have a way to go in and take the actual temperature values measured from our loggers and apply those values and adjust our thermal imagery. So we have deployed temperature loggers across 3 habitat types in our natural habitat setting, which I will get into later. Those habitat types include beaver ponds, side channel, and main channel habitats. So as I mentioned earlier, our interest in this project is looking at the impacts that beavers have in 2 settings. Specifically, beavers are demonstrated to have impacts to fisheries habitat. Their behavior promotes thermal heterogeneity in pond construction and side channel creation. They play a critical role in surface and groundwater facilitation and interactions in the hyporheic zone, specifically surface water and water below the riverbed, at least in the context that we're measuring. And so our second study site, which I'll discuss in a little bit here, is exploring beaver dam analogs as a restoration tool to alleviate some of those high temperature profiles in that study site. So we're really interested in these 4 vested aspects of how beavers impact the hydrologic cycle in our 2 settings, as well as what impacts that might have to fisheries who inhabit each study site. So this is the first study site. And what you're seeing here is a thermal orthomosaic of our imagery collected just a few weeks ago in October. So this model that you're seeing is over 1,400 images rendered together. And this is Big Creek, which is a major tributary to the middle fork of the Salmon River. This tributary provides rearing and spawning habitat for ESA listed Chinook salmon, and beavers have dominated the landscape for decades. But what I want to call out here, just from a visual standpoint, is the complexity and habitat types that we can see from this type of imagery. I've called out Beaver Pond 1 and Beaver Pond 2. Those are the 2 active beaver ponds that we've identified, both by a visual sighting of an active lodge and by evidence of beavers in the area. They are very active year in and year out, and it's incredible to go in each year and see what they've been up to here on the setting. So these beaver ponds also help facilitate a complex network of side channel complexity and lateral floodplain connectivity as well. So this imagery, as I said, was collected in October. And one thing that I want to stress is that we are not just capturing 1 season profile, but we are actually going in across 3 seasons, fall, spring, and summer, and recording imagery from these 2 study sites to render a full seasonal thermal profile. So just some of the observations early on in the study that we've noticed is thermal heterogeneity across these 3 habitats we've measured, anywhere from 0.25 to 1.5 degrees Celsius, which can have major implications depending on scale. We've also been able to determine heightened surface table and water storage impacts as a result of beaver ponds themselves, quite literally acting as water reservoirs. But all in all, we aim to establish long-term thermal trends for the study site as a result of beaver activity. So this is our second study site. This is the Zims property located on the Little Salmon River, just south of New Meadows. This property was acquired by the Nez Perce tribe a couple years ago for the goal of habitat restoration. Currently, this site is dominated by geothermal influence, which we actually have successfully mapped here. Those are noted by those white, yellow, hot tributaries that you can see actually dumping into the main stem here. And so the tribe acquired this property with the goal of restoration. Currently, the upper watershed at many times of the year is not thermally suitable for salmonids who inhabit the lower watershed. So the tribe, thanks to a grant from the Bureau of Reclamation, has been able to install beaver dam analogs as a restoration tool to try and alleviate those thermal profiles. So this provided us with a great opportunity to establish a second study site to see how BDAs can be explored and used in a restoration context. So right here, this is one of the geothermal influences that we were able to map from the property. You can see by that yellow hot pooling entering the main stem of the river right there. And this is a close-up of that image. So this flight was actually operated a couple weeks ago after BDA implementation on the property. You can see there's an actual unique thermal signature for the Beaver Dam analog that picks up across the river. But what I wanted to call attention here is the downstream thermal effect and this surface thermal trend that we've been able to capture through this imagery. You can quite literally see that geothermal influence is being pooled by the Beaver Dam analog. And whether these structures result in long-term cooling downstream of the river remains to be seen, but we are also using temperature loggers in this study site to better infer temperature data as well. So as I said earlier, this is radiometric imagery, allowing us to derive specific temperature values from each image that we collect. So this is that same image that I showed you earlier. What I want to call attention to is the high elevated thermal profiles at the source of the geothermal influence. But however, after BDA construction, you can see those thermal profiles have decreased significantly. Again, these values need to be calibrated with our loggers over time, but this just shows that we are able to capture some of these surface water thermal trends through our imagery, which is quite revealing. So this is on the left, you can see an image taken with before BDA installation in July of 2022. And the image on your right is the same image I just showed from post BDA installation. And again, you can see that pooling of geothermal water, and there actually is an apparent reduction in mixing as a result. So to the best of our knowledge, thermal imagery has not been used in a context to study beavers, but we argue there are wider and broader implications for this type of data and these types of models. So just here, we demonstrated that we can use these types of models to evaluate restoration goals, specifically whether those are being met. But we can also overlay other types of species-related data for fisheries, for instance, RED surveys. We can overlay thermal trends and thermal imagery across that type of data. But we can also establish long-term monitoring protocols for habitats of specific concern, whether these habitats are shifting in thermal profile and in response to climate change over time. This better allows us to identify critical habitat features for thermally sensitive species like salmonids, trout, and salmon. So of course, these modeling outputs, and this brings us back to GIS here today, we can export these outputs into usable formats for managers, from KMZ files to geo-reference TIFF files as well, for use in mapping applications and software-based programs such as Google Earth and ArcGIS, making them widely applicable to managers across both state and federal agencies and other private entities as well. So that's all I have time for today. Thanks so much. I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Hi, so I'm curious about what might an analog do to lower the temperature of the stream? Does it enforce upwelling from deeper parts of the stream that are cooler? What is that process that's happening?
So the theory is that it increases water residency time. And as a result of that, when you have a thermal pollution or a heat source, such as a geothermal influence, it allows greater time for mixing with the main stem of the channel, allowing for lower temperatures theoretically downstream of the Beaver Dam analog. There is also speculation that the Beaver Dam analogs themselves, the artificial structures, help facilitate really groundwater and surface water exchanges in the hyporheic zone as well. So again, the BDAs, at least in the context of this study, were just installed 2 weeks ago. So it's early on to establish any trends, but we're hopeful that we can reinforce what our beliefs are about Beaver Dam analogs in this setting over time.
So I know you just started this study, but have you seen any effect on the beavers themselves with the increase in heat behind the dam? Because beaver dams need the beavers to stick around if you want this to be like a stable structure? So has the increase in temperature affected their capability of just being there?
Just to clarify, do you mean across both study sites? So the second study site does not have beavers currently on the landscape.
Okay.
There is a hope within the tribe that they may be reintroduced on the setting. But one thing I do want to note is we've seen an interesting thermal trend in beaver ponds in the natural setting. That is thermal stratification. We've noticed that our temperature loggers, we have 2 loggers deployed in the upper 2 feet of the water column of those ponds and the lower 2 feet. And our temperature logger and the lower 2 feet of those beaver ponds often measures 2 to 2.5 degrees colder than the upper thermal stratification.
Thank you.
Thank you.
A question from online. They're asking, how do you perform the thermal image calibration on the water body?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as I mentioned earlier, at this time, we're inferring that our thermal imagery is only able to capture surface water trends. So what we have are 15 loggers displaced across the 3 habitat types that I've mentioned. And those are meant to capture thermal values, 1, to see how accurate our sensor is, and 2, to capture some of those deep or those hyporheic exchanges that we're attempting to map as well. So at this current time, our best method is performing a linear regression between the actual temperature loggers and the band values from our imagery. But this is a process that we're refining over time. We're just starting to get into this. Most likely, we are also working on an R script to help calibrate those values, and that's most likely what will be the outcome for this context.
Let's give it one more round of applause. You can use this, or you can use the. Okay. All right, and so next up we have Dave Pitney, a geography student at University of Idaho with standalone GPS devices still relevant today.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I make maps for GPS devices, and one of the questions I often get are, how about smartphones? Everyone has a smartphone, why don't you use this? And so every few years, I go through and look at the state of the industry of smartphones and how they've changed. So this was the year for research, and I decided to make it into a presentation. So these are the topics we'll be looking at today. I apologize, lots of words on the slides, but I only give this presentation every few years. So this is an example of the map that I make. It's a nice map. Anyone identify it? I wouldn't think so. So the way I look at GPS versus smartphones are by use cases. So navigation by the public, and I split it into 2 areas. Everyday navigation, which is your smartphones. You use it to navigate your auto, locate restaurants, and it's really a 2D world. It doesn't include elevation. For your GPSs, I consider it to be a trying day where you're off trail, you're in adverse conditions, you have to return to base camp, and there you're using a 3D world because you do have an elevation value. And your everyday, if you make a mistake, well, you just take the next right and your smartphone will recalculate. If you're having a difficult or trying day and you make a mistake, it may be a little more difficult. So GPS accuracy, everyone thinks, well, it's position, how close to true is your information. But it also turns out that you want your signal, your results to be reliable. If you found this place today, you want to be able to find it tonight when you return. Or if you're having a research plot, you want to find it next month, next year. And then the third part is integrity. So are the GPS satellites, the system, is that operating correctly? This is more important for, call it a mission critical application. So if you're navigating an airplane using GPS, you want to know that the system is working correctly. There's three error sources. You have your satellite system itself up there. You have your receivers, there's error there, and then there's geography. So the interesting thing about accuracy, once you get into it, is it's multiple components. They're variable, they're random, they're interactive. These are sometimes difficult to measure or correct for because your satellites are in geostationary orbit. There's error sources, I call them up there. So it deals with your satellites, and there's a list of things. The numbers after them are plus or minus meter error. The up there conditions, they can be corrected by what's called SBAS. That's an additional signal that can be sent to your receiver, and they correct for these kind of up there errors. Not necessarily in real time because they have to be calculated and then sent. And then there's what I call down here errors. So multipath, so signals that bounce off a building or a cliff, they can confuse the GPS receiver. Your satellite constellation, how many satellites your receiver can see, are they all concentrated in one place? Obstructions, receiver noise design, many factors. So this is your typical GPS screen. Two things to notice here is the EPA and the DOP, and I'll explain those now. But this is typically when you're looking at how accurate is my position fix. EPE is estimated position error, and that's the number that people commonly focus on. It's how close horizontally to true. Now, if your receiver knew what your true location was, it would just display it. What's interesting about EPE, and most people don't realize this, is that it's calculated as 50% of the positions are within that EPA. So on the previous slide, it was 28 feet. That means half the time your position is within 28 feet. Most people think it's at the 95% confidence level. So if you really want 95%, you have to start multiplying. The other thing is that with your elevation, your vertical, it's your EPE times 3 because of the way the position is calculated. The dilution of precision, that refers to your satellite constellation geometry. Are they all grouped in one part of the sky? Can you see them all? And it really tells you how sensitive to changes it is. Because if all the satellites are grouped together, you move, it's going to be very sensitive, your position to those changes. The DOP, they give you a confidence level. 1, 2, 3, you can be very confident that that's a good signal. And the other thing is that these are always estimates. So estimates are as good as an estimate. Garmin is really the only GPS receiver manufacturer in the US. And it depends on how accurate, depends on which signal you're reading. So early GPS, there was only L1 and L2. L2 was the military signal, and that gives you about a 15-meter EPE. You can now use multiple satellite systems, so not only the US GPS, but you can use the Russian Glasnost or Beidou from China. And if you use those, you can get an EPE of 9 meters. The SBAS in the US, it's called WAS. So that's using this corrective signal for the up there errors. I've seen 3 meters, which is quite good. And coming now, they have a new signal called L5, and that can get down to a 1 meter EPE radius. Now, of course, that's at a 50% confidence level. So you have to start the multiplication if you want to get down to 95%, which makes a difference if you're going to be using GPS to help do auto navigation, driverless cars, because you would like to have 95% or more, not 50%. Am I in this lane or that lane? Makes a difference. Smartphones, they usually only use the L1 signal, and they have an additional thing called assisted GPS. And what that does is it doesn't necessarily use the GPS signal, but it uses a data connection that says, well, since you don't have a GPS, this is where we think you are. And the smartphone, these error rates are usually what's calculated by the GPS chip manufacturers, and maybe they're optimistic at times, maybe not. And so it's as designed, it's not calculated now. Your GPS receivers will tell you what your real error estimate is now. But the question you have to ask yourself is, how much accuracy is required? And that goes back to your use case. You also have intentional signal interference. So everyone just assumes the GPS signal is correct. Not necessarily. What this data is derived from is on airplanes, they report their position and the type of aircraft and their number. They also report how accurate their GPS signal is. And you can see around Moscow, Turkey, people have turned on jammers for obvious reasons. You also find this in the US, particularly around Dallas. There's been military testing, and so you get degraded signals. Unfortunately, there's no way to understand this on your receivers. So on smartphones, you have to ask which smartphone. This is sales figures for last year. A lot of smartphones are sold. So there's a wide range of models and features. So if you are designing maps for smartphones, which smartphone? Because they have many different capabilities. The position data that you can get on your smartphone, some of them have GPS chipsets, some of them just use a GPS, many of them have none. So again, another thing to consider. But there are advantages to smartphones. As here, it's a large dynamic market. Rapid development cycles, displays are good, you have maps. Disadvantages, generally only a GPS. Positioning, again, just horizontal. If you want to know where you are on the slope of a mountain, that information's just not available. They're fragile. People say, oh no, my phone is fine. Try dropping it in the stream next to them. They'll be very upset. Since they have low margins, there's cost pressures on the GPS chip manufacturers because it's not a key technology for the smartphones. We all know about the OS vulnerabilities, and to come back to the presentation here, data scraping by carriers, apps, social media, trackers. Anyone install a tracker on their kid's cell phone so you know where they are? Anyone who's done it to their spouse? Let's hope not. So GPS receivers, you do have higher accuracy because this is what it's designed for. Generally higher quality for all of the parts inside. GPS is a core strength for Garmin. That handheld is actually a small part of their market. They have a large aviation and marine units. It's rugged. One of the things I like is it takes AA batteries. So when your batteries run out, you just pop in 2 more. And particularly good if you're on an extended trip. And maps, again, you have free and commercial maps. There's disadvantages. There's only one manufacturer of GPSs in the US, and that's Garmin. And part of that is because it's a small industry. Slow development cycle. The interface is from the 90s, so you have to spend time learning it, and you have to really want to be able to navigate. And again, it's a standalone device. So your smartphone, you have that with you. Do you really want to invest in another device? So which is best? For everyday use, really the smartphone is good. And if you're navigating in this type of an environment, a smartphone is fine. And a GPS is probably more than you need. If you're out down here, you need accuracy. You need it to be rugged. If it breaks and you're using it to navigate back, it's a problem. So the GPS device is your partner. So like I said, I make maps for GPS devices. We use OSM, geographic data, contours, 30 meters right now. I'm working on 15 meter as more data came available last year. The display I make is adjusted for hiking. A lot of times your smartphones are adjusted for city and worldwide coverage, including the polar regions. And these maps are free. So the map I showed before down in Argentina, and here's zooming in. You can see that it does have a trail to it. And the accuracy you would get with this, these contours are accurate within that EPE sense. So particularly if you're trying to find your way back and you're trying to find a trail, you can hit the trail with the GPS and these maps. And hopefully that was 10 minutes exact. So a lot of information.
Any quick question from the crowd or from online?
Well,
all right,
that's good.
Thank you so much. Okay, one more talk in this short talk session. We have Michael Decker, employee of University of Idaho and collaborator with the Center for Digital Inquiry and Learning at the library and the Confluence Lab. And he's going to be speaking about his project, Keeping Watch, Mapping Idaho's Fire Lookouts Through Lived Experience. Thank you, Michael.
Hey, everybody. So I guess I'm coming at you from a much different angle. I'm with the humanities more than the geospatial sciences. So I'm going to be talking today about the map we're making. It's ongoing. We're turning it into a website. It's primarily funded through a library seed grant and supported through the Center for Digital Inquiry and Learning and the Confluence Lab, as Evan said. So I'll just jump into it. As you can see, when you come into this site here, it's a map interface, and we have different fire towers. This is what we got paid to do, was hike around the fire towers for the summer and record. They literally paid us to do it for a summer and record different interviews with former and current fire lookouts, because we were just trying to think about generally what space is. and maybe the difference between space and place. So we were thinking about it as something represented objectively through like a GIS interface, like a grid-like structure in a map, and something that is also subjective. So something that is storied, experienced, and built, right? Something that's experienced subjectively. And so we thought that the fire tower would be a really interesting place to do that, because these people are literally using, right? They're using an azimuth, Osborne Fire Finder, to accurately locate fires along a Cartesian-like grid. And then also, many of them are going up there to like, be out in the woods, kind of generally. And, and find peace, whatever people do on top of mountains, have a religious experience. So I wanted to just kind of generally demo what our design is looking like. So I'm going to start off with, I don't use a PC very often. So this is Diablo Mountain Lookout. So as you can see, when you click into the fire towers, you kind of get this more personalized view. It looks as though you might be in the fire tower. And we used a Theta 360-degree camera to take these photos that you can kind of interact with within the tower itself. I'm gonna pan around. There's Bill. Bill's been doing this for a while. And then below that, we have a couple different things you can see here. You have a few different things going on to kind of play with the tension, the juxtaposition between the subjective and the objective aspects of this. We have, a circle with the map right there. We also have a technical description of the cabin, some stuff about the history. And then we also have a narrative piece that we write, which is just kind of, also newsflash, everybody working on this, we were English majors, so we're just trying to write like a long form essay and embed some stuff alongside of it. So, and then down below you would have different videos. So here's Bill talking about being a lookout.
You just introduce yourself and then.
Do we have sound at all? Oh, it's okay. We'll roll with it. Yeah. So that's generally
more.
Yeah, it's not a big deal if we don't. So yeah, so that's generally the form of the towers that you have there. And I also wanted to bring up that we found that this format was just really interesting because we were also trying to explore 3 different types of towers. So there's a tower that is active, it's being used for fire suppression purposes. And then we were also thinking about different mapping technologies that are being used in fire suppression that are maybe pushing the fire tower out of use. So we also wanted to look at towers that were still being used for whatever reason, towers that were being preserved historically, and then they might not be actually being used for fire suppression purposes, and also towers that were falling into ruin. So this is one that's still being staffed, still being used, and then we also have towers that let's see if I can find it. This is Cold Mountain. I guess our Theta didn't upload correctly to this one. But this is one that's actually been, Cold Mountain is a tower that's actually been taken off of the mountain and moved to somebody's front yard. So we thought it was like, there was kind of an interesting thing happening there where we have it located to its original position. We have interviews with a historian named Richard Holm, who moved the tower into his parents' front yard.
I've been to a lot of lookouts, but I'm kind of like you guys. I've collected stories, not necessarily.
I'll show you that in a second. But the idea is that this tower is sort of existing in a couple different spaces, right? It's like it's historical use, it's modern sort of preservation state, and again, the map just presented itself as an interesting medium to be able to convey those things. Richard's also a super cool guy. He's a bush pilot and just kind of a super kooky dude. He likes fire towers. But again, I don't use these very often. Okay. What I really wanted to show you though was what I became really interested in was the fire tower is ruined. and how even in ruin, it still sort of functions as technology. So this is one that we hiked to out in the Frank Church called Chicken Peak. I don't know if anybody's ever been over by Mosquito Ridge, which is kind of a popular area in the church. But this is one that's fallen into complete like disrepair. And actually, if I toggle around, that's our team. And the joke for that day was that we kind of became the fire lookouts that day because the tower kind of being in being in an interesting location, we were actually up on it and we spotted the smoke from inside the tower and then watched this fire turn into what became, it was called the Dixie Jumbo fire. And this is a video. So then here we kind of, have the opportunity to embed our own experience into the map. So we watched that kind of start as a little tiny smoke column and then throughout the day kind of blow up into this big fire. But yeah, we were actually going to hike to that ridge and then we decided not to go that day. Yeah. But yeah, I think that this project though, it was just an interesting way to explore like new forms that humanities people can be using, right? I think that we generally do just write essays that get published in obscure journals and forgotten. And, we were thinking that maybe it would be interesting to try to write long form essays and embed them on a map, right? And so I think that as much as it is an archival project, right? At its core, it's documenting the stories of lookouts and these structures before some of them go away, right? It also just became an experiment in form, just seeing what we could do with that. So yeah, trying to think of anything else. It keeps going away. Anyway, that's kind of what I got though. Does anybody have any questions for me? I know it's kind of a crash course, but yeah.
Anyone have some questions? Come on up to the first page before we're back.
Thank you. That was really cool. This platform, is that on ArcGIS Online? Or how is it hosted?
Ooh, we were really wishing that Devin would be here today. Yeah, can Evan talk to that? Yeah, so we're working with Devin Becker in the library too, and he got sick today. We were hoping he'd be here to be able to answer some of these.
So yeah, I work with Michael and Devin in the library as well. So this is actually Leaflet JS, and then the data underneath is actually CSVs, and we just turn the CSVs essentially into GeoJSON, and then the Leaflet JS consumes the GeoJSON. So there's nothing. The tile layers underneath are kind of open tile layers that are available to people. So just Leaflet JS, a lot of people use it for all kinds of stuff, and that's what we do.
Question for you from online. Someone is asking if the fire tower has internet connectivity and electricity.
Yeah, I was surprised that some of them do. Not because the Forest Service pays for it or anything, but because some people build their own like cell towers. It's weird. I don't know how they do it. But there's actually, I can show you this Spot Mountain, the Mokes, also described as the finest eyes in the forest by many people. You can't see it in this photo, but Mark literally built like a little tower. And so I didn't have cell service because he also password protects it somehow. I don't know how or why he would do that. I mean, this thing is like way out there, but he was like on his phone while we were out there. Like his son called him at one point, but I had zero service when I was out there. So some of them do, but it's like just rogue people making their own towers. So yeah. Anybody else?
Are all the gray points on the map all the towers that you still need to get to?
You mean like oh, let me explain that. You mean oh yeah, so all of these are towers that we're still going to get to, and then all the blue areas, that's called the scene area. It's a 25-mile radius around the tower that the fire lookout's responsible for. But yeah, all of the little gray ones. So we ripped what's the file called? Like, is this a KLM file? Is that what the file type is called. We just ripped a file off of somebody else's map. They had made a fire towers. It was like a much simpler map. It's called Rex's fire tower page that everybody should look at. And so, so yeah, the idea would be to fill in the rest of those circles. And then we've also had like plans to, I know Devin mentioned it, like maybe making some of this technology like available to check out for people who might be traveling to fire towers. So like, again, the idea is that these are sort of open-ended spaces. They're, you know, highly participatory, and we could maybe even sort of try to mimic that in the way that it gets made by letting people go out and, you know, take photographs and yeah. So, but yes, they're fire towers. Anybody else, or good? Okay.
One last quick question.
Somebody's asking who manages the towers and if they have a camera installed at them.
I don't think so. I think that most of these, I think that we went out with the expectation that these people were like just hippies in the woods, and a lot of them are like super militant types that don't want to be seen, you know. So no, they'd probably sabotage it if they put a camera in there. No, but no, there are none. There are no cameras. Yeah.
And it's the U.S. Forest Service.
I mean, so you think it'd be U.S. Forest Service. Some of them are. Some of them are Bureau of Land Management. Some of them are IDL. Some of them are timber protection agencies. So like weirdly, there's still towers that are managed for like logging companies, you know. So there's a lot of different agencies that do it. So I mean, the Forest Service is like who's most well known. They do a lot of like the preservation sites. So in particular, like in Washington, if you go like the North Cascades or something and rent an Airbnb type fire lookout, that would be the Forest Service, but lots of different agencies do it. So, yeah.
Let's thank Michael over. We're going to take a little break, and then we'll be back with another presentation very shortly. 2 o'clock. Yes, 2 o'clock.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to the last short talk session for the GIS Day event. My name is Felix Lau. I'm currently a faculty member from the Department of Earth and Spatial Sciences. We are excited to launch a new BS degree in GIS Science and a new online master degree in GIS Science in the fall of 2023. So you can check it out. So we are really, I'm very pleased to introduce our speaker and for this session. And each speaker will have 10 minutes to give their presentation, and we will have a couple minutes for questions and answers after each of them. So the first speaker is Lake Hopkins from Idaho Geological Survey, and he will be talking about a new database initiative of geologic mapping in Idaho. Thank you.
Pull it up. All right, well, thanks everybody. Happy to be here. It's been a day of very interesting talks. I thought today would be a good opportunity for me to sort of introduce to everybody what we've been doing at the Idaho Geological Survey, specifically some of the interesting GIS data sets we've been producing, and a pretty cool new project we're working on. This base image here, you guys can probably place yourself, Moscow over here on the left half. This is from our state geologic map. The Idaho Geological Survey we have an office here in Moscow, and we have an office down in Boise, and we are a geoscience research organization, a state agency. And so we produce a whole bunch of data. And so what I'd like to do today is briefly do a quick overview of some notable IGS data products that you might find interesting, do a quick update on the status of geologic mapping in Idaho, just for some context, And then I'm going to introduce a database initiative that we're undergoing, along with many other state surveys in the country. And yeah, let's go ahead and get started. So IGS, as I said, research agency related, of course, geology. And we produce an extensive data sets, regularly maintained, updated. Of course, probably the most significant data sets we produce are related to geologic mapping. And we'll talk about those here shortly. But I wanted to go over a few other things that we provide. So we do geologic mapping, geochemistry, geochronology. These are both spatial and non-spatial data sets. One that you guys may find very interesting is related to hazards. And so our hazards geologist, who's primarily based out of Boise, he published last year a very interesting data set. It's a landslide inventory database for Idaho. I think he did this in conjunction with the Idaho Department of Transportation. And it's available online. All of our data is freely available, easily accessible on our website. And so this is just a screenshot of the web map for the landslide inventory database. You can also download that data directly for your own use. So we think a lot about hazards, including landslides, earthquakes, but we also think a whole lot about resources, particularly mineral resources. And so one of the first databases we published, not a geologic map database, is called the Mines and Prospects Database of Idaho. It is maintained and updated each year. It has over 9,000 properties. And those properties each contain then numerous files. And so very impressive data set. And you can access it, again, you can download directly, or you can find it on our interactive web map where you can actually query and find that data there as well. Other things of interest, oil and gas, historic oil and gas production. We have on our web map and as another data set database for historic exploration for oil and gas. We also publish periodic reports on present activities, or millage, or tonnage, milled, mined, all sorts of interesting data there. But we look at all aspects of geology. And so we also have extensive hydrogeology data sets, geothermal resources, and among others. So I encourage you, if you haven't gotten a chance to take a look, you can go to our new website, idahogeology.org. We have a web map there. You can toggle on a whole bunch of different layers and sort of explore the data that we produce. But today I really wanted to talk about geologic mapping. And so if you look on the left, this is the geologic map of Idaho. Hopefully it shows up okay. It's a large map compressed to fit on the screen. Published in 2012. It's, I think, very attractive, a very, very interesting map. And you might have the impression, looking at the state map of Idaho, that we have mapped the entire state of Idaho. And that's really not true. On the right, you can see this is our sort of status map. This is the kind of map we submit whenever we submit a proposal to do more mapping. And anything in blue there is mapped, either blue stripes or solid blue, is the areas of Idaho that are mapped. And presently, we've actually only mapped a little less than 40% of the state of Idaho. So there's a lot of work to be done in producing geologic data at a sufficient scale. And the scale that we target is the 7.5 minute quadrangle, the 1 to 24,000 scale. So let's think about geologic maps for a quick second. This is just an interesting thought that I've shown every time I give a talk about something like this. On the left is again that blown up image from the state map of Idaho. You can see Moscow on the left, published in 2012. On the opposite side, this is an excerpt of the 1815 geologic map of the United Kingdom by the so-called William Strata Smith. This was one of the first sort of national geologic map. And if you compare the two images, even though we're looking at roughly 200 years, 2 centuries of geologic research, the map itself looks strikingly similar, right? And so I've been arguing for years that I could give this map, this is a map we published last year, this is the Deegan Mountain Quadrangle, in the salmon area, vicinity of salmon. You could give this map to a 19th century geologist and they would know how to use it. They could interpret it, you'd be all fully consistent. So the geologic map has not changed. Well, it's changed quite a bit, but the core of it hasn't changed that much in 200 years. But what has changed a lot is geologic mapping, both the exercise of geologic mapping, but also the fact that these maps are, all of the data that's shown in these maps is GIS data. So this is all supported by a fairly complex GIS data set. And we hope to serve not just the very attractive maps that we spend a lot of time to produce, but we want to actually make that data available in a user-friendly format. And so there's always been a really big question: how do you encode all of the information about a geologic map, the interpretations, the line work, the author's intent, into a database format that can be easily disseminated and shared, both with technical experts, but also the public? And for years, agencies were doing this for decades, producing GIS data sets, and every state survey sort of attempted to answer that question for themselves. How are we going to produce our data? And that produced a lot of varying data sets. In 2020, the United States Geological Survey released this a standardized database format called GEMS, Geologic Map Schema. And it was designed in consultation with a number of state actors in order to come up with a standardized format. And it's really quite simple in its structure. Effectively, you have one geodatabase. In that geodatabase, you have multiple feature data sets. Those feature data sets relate to the different pieces of spatial information. So we have the geologic map, geologic cross sections, but all of that data is then supported by a set of non-spatial tables which support that information. And so all of our data now is being produced compliant with the USGS standard. And so I'll give you a quick rundown of what our data looks like, but this is an extensively documented database format. So how would we take this map and then try and fold it into a geodatabase, a GEM style geodatabase? And so this is just a quick mock-up I threw together in PowerPoint here. Color coded to some extent to try and match with the geodatabase. So here is the ARC catalog view. We've got the geodatabase for IGS Digital Web Map 200, the Deegan Mountain Quad. We have 3 feature data sets, one for the geologic map, one for each of the cross sections. And that's really the core of the data. If you download this data set, that's really what you're looking for primarily. But we also have a bunch of other information that's written on this map that doesn't fit neatly into a feature data set. And that includes the descriptions of all the lithologies, definitions for the symbologies, what the actual symbols are. How can you actually apply the same symbol we do? We've got correlation charts, a whole bunch of extra information. So we have 3 feature data sets here, and then we have a whole bunch of stuff that fits into these non-spatial tables. And so those non-spatial tables, which I highlight down here, there's a glossary, description of map units, and the data sources are really key to understanding what we've included inside the database. And so moving forward, all of the geologic map data that IGS publishes is going to come in this format. You get our website, download the PDF, download the zip file. You're going to get a GEMS compliant geodatabase, a version of that database in shapefiles in order to be backward compatible or compatible with all of you who've bravely chosen to shirk Esri and venture into the open source world. An ArcGIS map package, which allows you to just pull up the data in a way that looks very, very similar to the published geologic map, an ArcMap document, and then very importantly, a resources folder. And that resources folder contains the tools that you need that the standard user may not have in order to actually visualize the data. And that includes any supplemental or non-standard information. The figures that get drawn on the map can be represented here, the correlation chart, et cetera, et cetera. But really importantly, fonts. So the geologic maps use specific fonts. So we have special characters. That's for both map labels, but also for symbology. and then a style file. And so the symbology for the map is actually encoded into the database so that anyone who acquires it can actually symbolize it to match ours exactly. So that's what our data looks like now. And so we have a bunch of different data sets. Those are our new geologic map data sets. But we're moving a little bit, looking to the future. We are not just sort of switching over our database format. What we're hoping to do is take our existing GIS data sets or existing maps that are published but do not have a published GIS data set and compile them into so-called seamless 1 to 24,000 scale geologic maps. And so this is where we're at with this now. We've got 5 project areas where we're taking that individual quadrangle maps, compiling them together. And the areas in gold here are already completed. The areas in red are the things we're actually working on this year. And over time, we're going to be able to wrap up this pretty soon. And the goal is many years down the future to have a coherent, seamless 1 to 24,000 scale geologic map for the entire state of Idaho. Doing that in pieces, and then eventually asking all the really hard questions about when you try to merge all of these different pieces together. But anyway, that's our goal. That's kind of what we're up to, and happy to take any questions.
Have you tried loading this into QGIS?
I have not explored this in QGIS, but hopefully with the shape files, of course, you'll be able to get the data. How the symbology tools would apply in QGIS, I'm not sure.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so our next speaker is Aaron Sparks. So he will be talking about using multi-temporal LiDAR to assess fire impacts on tree growth. Thank you. The stage is yours.
Okay. Well, thanks for having me here. I'm excited to be here on GIS Day. I'm Aaron Sparks. I'm research faculty in the College of Natural Resources. And today I'm going to give a brief little talk about the current remote sensing research that we're doing right here at the University of Idaho Experimental Forest. It's going to be a little remote sensing heavy, but GIS and spatial analysis are very much at the core of this research. So first, I always like to start with why are we doing this research? What's our motivation here? So really, we want to use remote sensing on the school forest for monitoring forest growth for several reasons. The first being primarily that forest monitoring is essential for any sustainable forest management. We need to know what's out there, where it's at, for managers to be able to schedule harvests and schedule treatments on that particular landscape. And if we zoom out, timber activities and forest management are a huge part of the Idaho and regional economy. And I'm sure you all realize we all use various wood products every single day. So being able to manage our forests in a sustainable manner is very important. So before I dive into our remote sensing research, I want to give a little history. So forest inventory is essentially assessing what and how much is out there. So what species, how much of each species, what's the board foot volume of this particular stand. So historically, we've measured this by using field plots and subsampling. So we're able to get basically small little subsamples of a stand and extrapolate to that stand. And of course, if we measure those plots over time, we're able to get measures of change and growth. But recent remote sensing technologies have really pushed this field into the next generation. So essentially, we're moving from these spatially incomplete inventories that I just showed to a spatially complete inventory. And some of the technologies that are pushing us there are airborne LiDAR, which for those of you not familiar with LiDAR is essentially a system that sends out a laser pulse and it measures the time it takes for the pulse to leave the sensor, hit an object and return. And from that time, we can calculate the distance. And if we put it on a nice scanning platform, such as a plane or drone, we can cover a landscape. And we end up with these really beautiful 3D point clouds showing the individual LiDAR returns. So this is a particular plot on the University of Idaho's experimental forest. And it's showing the LiDAR point returns colored by height, where warmer colors are higher heights and cooler colors are lower heights. So you can see this is a very data-rich data set. And it's going beyond 2 dimensions. So for every LiDAR return that we saw on that previous slide, we have an X and Y location and height. We have intensity of the reflectance return, along with a suite of other information that we can use. And so to really move from the field-based samples to more of a forest census, getting all the trees on the forest, we really need to move towards what we call an individual tree detection scenario. So these are showing the same plot on the school forest. On the left is a raw point cloud, again colored by height. And on the right is that same point cloud, except segmented into individual trees. And I don't have enough time to talk about how we do it, but you can see we can capture most of the trees. Just FYI, these trees are colored randomly to help you see the individual trees. So what are some of the things we can get from this? So if we take our example stand, this is a stand up at the University of Idaho Experimental Forest. This is just a bird's eye view of some high resolution imagery that we have. If we overlay that with some of our LiDAR data, so this is essentially a 2-dimensional version of our LiDAR data, again showing higher heights and warmer colors, lower heights and cooler colors. So we can individually extract each individual tree in this particular stand. So again, getting that X and Y location. We can use the height information associated with each individual tree location to help us model how big the tree is, so the stem diameter. Again, very useful information if you're a manager thinking about where you want to put in treatments or potentially harvest. We can use various LiDAR metrics to help us classify species. So again, very useful, as all species are not created equal in terms of value for a manager. And of course, what we're really interested in is capturing change over time. So basically flying the school forest every year, every couple of years, segmenting the individual trees, and hopefully being able to capture individual tree growth. And of course, as I mentioned in the title slide, I can't do this presentation without bringing some fire into it. We really want to see the impacts of fire on individual tree growth. So we're utilizing some old experiments on the school forest where we burned stands in 2014 and we measured the fire intensity. We collected increment cores to get radio growth 2 years post-fire, and then we collected ALS, so LiDAR data in 2019, 20, and 2022. And so our initial findings are pretty cool. We used our increment cores to essentially look at the radial growth reduction for burned and unburned trees. And not surprisingly, non-burned trees grew faster than burned trees. What was really interesting is this was stratified by fire intensity. So trees that were subjected to higher fire intensities grew less. Those that were subjected to lower fire intensity grew a little more. And we really wanted to build off this. So this is showing a 2-year post-fire response. We wanted to build off this and see if we could capture this long-term height growth change with our LiDAR data sets. And this is some ongoing work, so we're still doing some quality checks and so forth, but it looks like there is a very similar pattern. Again, we're seeing these long-lasting height growth reductions in trees that were subjected to higher fire intensities versus lower fire intensities. And this is exciting as it suggests that we can potentially model this effect. And really, the important things that I want you to take away and the potential applications of this research, primarily being, we really want to get a better understanding of fire effects on various tree sizes and species. Our knowledge at the current moment is not great. And we hope this research will serve as a good guide for managers that plan to use prescribed fires, perhaps guiding them whether using a prescribed fire is worth it in terms of the productivity loss. And finally, we hope that this information will be useful for informing forest growth and earth system models and making fire effects and productivity growth a little more accurate. So with that, if you're interested in this research, I'm usually pretty good about updating my ResearchGate and Twitter profiles if you're interested in learning more. I'd also like to thank College of Natural Resources and Northwest Management. And finally, thanks for your attention.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Fantastic presentation. Any questions? Yes.
Yes, thank you for this presentation. I'd like to know.
Yeah, you can come to the front.
Okay, thanks for the presentation. I would like to know, like, does your model cover like variations in temperature?
Variations in temperature?
Yes, I know you did some of the measurements during maybe like summer, I guess.
Yeah, the ALS that I showed was collected after the growing season, so typically late July.
Because you know sometimes it involves like laser beam, and these measurements do change like with temperature.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I wish we had LiDAR data every year so we could see the variation with climate.
Okay.
Because we know it's there. But our ALS data sets are like every 2 years, so some of the more extreme years in terms of temperature and precipitation we miss, and some we get. So we kind of have to do with what we have, I guess.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Oh, you were talking about the deriving the stem diameter from the height? Or
Yes.
So do you have like a formula or something if they're so?
Yeah, I mean, we basically use, have you heard of like allometrics? It's basically using easy to measure, basically modeling hard to measure measurements using easy to measure measurements. So for instance, a lot of people will model biomass using DBH. And so on the school forest, we've developed some allometric relations between height and DBH. And so that's kind of how we're able to model that.
Okay.
I think there's a question from the online. Thank you.
Just a second. Yeah, so there's a question from someone online who asks, how often is your LiDAR scanning, and are you also planning to use multispectral imaging?
I assume they mean how often are we collecting the LiDAR? As I mentioned, we're getting it pretty much every year, but we started in 2019. So we're missing a lot of the early years as far as this burn experiment. And what was the second part of the question?
They asked, are you also planning to
Oh.
use multispectral?
To be decided.
Yeah, any? Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, so let's welcome our next speaker, Wilmer Robertson. He or she is from the Office of Information Technology Services at the state of Idaho, and the presentation will be on Zoom. Can you? Yeah. So please share your screen and get started. The stage is yours. Thank you.
All right. Can you guys confirm that you're looking at my slideshow?
Yeah, everything looks great.
Okay,
Thank you.
perfect. Okay, well, thank you very much. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk a little bit about the Next Generation 911 project that my office, the Office of Information Technology Services, is working on. So in broad strokes, this is how it works. Going forward for Next Generation 911, if somebody dials 911, it's going to use GIS for routing and dispatching. So that means as soon as she makes this call, it's going to look at GIS to figure out which dispatch center or which public safety answering point needs to get this call. And then once the call is made, it will use things like the addresses and street center lines to figure out where she is. And then additionally, it will take a look and drill down some layers that show where different emergency service boundaries are. So which law enforcement, which ambulance, which fire department needs the response so that the correct agency can be dispatched to give her a hand. So that's it in a nutshell. So the 5 layers that are core to this are those site addresses, the road center lines, emergency service boundaries, public safety public safety entering point boundaries to make sure that the 911 call goes to the right place, and then provisioning boundaries, which basically tell which agency is responsible for the GIS data in those areas. So hopefully it's really obvious that this new system is going to rely on very high quality GIS data. And so this is where we come in. So what our role is. So I'm the Geographic Information Officer as of a couple of days now. And I work for the Idaho Geospatial Office. And our role is to help coordinate GIS in Idaho. And so what happened is that the Office of Emergency Management received funding from the legislature, specifically dedicated to help with get Idaho's GIS ready for Next Generation 911, or at the very least get it closer to ready. So then they sent that money, they passed it along to my office. And so we are working on it right here. Again, because we are this coordinating office, and those are some data sets that require coordination and that eventually will also be very helpful for many other purposes besides Next Generation 911. So very critical in getting this done is the Idaho Public Safety Communication Commission, who's really been sponsoring getting this funding and then having it sent to our office. So our goals are to help all the public safety answering points get their data ready for Next Generation 911, or like I said, a little bit closer. And we found that some of those organizations are well on their way. They've been planning for it for years. Others, we're finding, old maps and basically just a really good opportunity to even help them with the GIS data and even help them right now. See if they can get better maps and better data for what they're using now and be ready for the future. So it requires very stringent quality control efforts. And also, and unfortunately, this effort ends in June when the money runs out. But we want to put in place something that will maybe help carry the momentum forward to keep this going, or the best that we can. So the first thing I did is figuring out what's already happening in Idaho. So I talked to a number of different leaders in Next Generation 911. I went over to Bonneville. I visited with Bill Reynolds in Nez Perce and some others in Idaho to kind of fill me in where the problems were, what was needed to really get them going from point A to point B. And so based on that, I wrote up a proposal, and this is what we are doing with the funding that came our way. We hired 4 GIS contractors, analysts, so they've been on board for about 2 months. It's no good to give people GIS tools if they don't have the manpower or even know where to start. So two of them are located in Boise. One of them is up north. She lives in Ponderay, and so she's helping your neck of the woods there. One is working out in eastern Idaho. It's important to get GIS data standards. So if we are helping folks to get their data up to a certain level, we need to really know what that data is going to look like. We invested some in our GIS infrastructure. So in essence, once this data is aggregated and goes to a state level, which can then be sent back to those different public safety answering points, we need to have the GIS infrastructure to handle that. We will never advocate or allow people to dispatch directly off our data. So they would need to take the data, move it over to their local area. And I can see this being really handy for different regions to get the data for their neighbors. So their maps in their dispatch center doesn't just end and then there's no more, but actually continues. So they have a little bit of situational awareness along those boundaries. The next component is a software as a service solution. So there's a number of companies in the United States that provide those services for Next Generation 911 GIS data. And this will help do all sorts of checks on the data, validate it, and also help aggregate it so we can get to a seamless map for all of Idaho, which we can then, like I said, share out again with those different dispatch centers. And finally, we are getting some consulting, both from a company that has a depth of knowledge in Next Generation 911, as well as Esri, just to help us configure all this GIS infrastructure properly. So the standards, and actually a really, really big part of the work was done by Bill Reynolds in Nez Perce. He herded us cats to try and put together those standards. So we approved those during our September ITC EC meeting. Tomorrow, during our next meeting, we will still go through some minor edits. It's very minor. And if you're wondering what the ITC EC is, then visit gis.idaho.gov for more information. This is really the central place and the central committee where we're trying to get different people to work together. But that would be a discussion for another longer presentation. So this is where we are at. We visited pretty much every dispatch center in Idaho. So you can tell on the map that we only have Minidoka, Butte, Camas, and Valley County to go. So out of the 43 that are here, we are just about done. That was really our first stop. It's just kind of getting our arms around what we were up against. We filled out surveys just to kind of sense whether those 5 core data sets that I talked about earlier, the addresses, roads, emergency service zones, those layers, if they existed, if there was a process in place to keep them updated. And so we asked all of them for then that data, and then we dove a little bit deeper just to kind of see how close their standards were to what we have. And at the same time, in talking to them and looking at the data that they gave us, we started building different projects. So right now we identified almost 200 projects that our team will need to work on, reprioritize them, and we'll try and get done as much as we can, and then we'll switch focus later on, like say early in the spring next year, to where we're at, and then plan for where we need to leave things when that money runs out. Okay. So this is a website that's actually live and public because I do want to give transparency. So the folks that are funding this and the people that are participating can actually keep track of where we're at. And let me see here. I want to go back to my PowerPoint slide and go to the next slide. Nope, it's just going to go back there. Oh, I need to be right there. Okay, so that brings me to my last slide. I know this was a really quick run through, but thank you for listening. If you live in a county, you may interact with us, or you may have already heard from us. We appreciate anybody's support or any insights anybody may have. And feel free to contact me if you have more questions or like to share your thoughts. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for all the speakers. Any questions for the next generation 911?
Hi, thank you for the presentation. The city of Moscow is dispatched from Whitman County, Washington. Is this technology going to be available for them as well?
Hopefully, yes. And we have had a meeting with the folks from Whitcomb and from Moscow, so they are definitely being considered, and we are looking at their data as well. I'm not entirely sure how it's all going to fall together. One thing that I can tell is that similar efforts are happening all over the country, including the state of Washington. And so as they move forward and then we move forward and we work together, the goal would be to get a seamless map that covers both all of Idaho, including Moscow, and then that would extend into Washington as well.
Okay, any other questions from the audience? Okay, so I have a quick question about the next generation 911. So is there, I know 911 is mainly you call the number, you dial your number on your mobile phone or phone, but are there any way to get access to 911 without a phone or through internet or things like that?
Oh,
are you aware of that?
That is a really good question, and I am not the person that can answer that. I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you. That's mainly not a GIS question as well.
That's right, right. Yeah, I just boxed into GIS. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So thank you for coming to the GIS Day. Will Bruce speak a few words at the end of the event, the day? Thank you. Thank you for having me as well. Yeah.
Thank you everyone for attending online and everyone in person. That concludes our GIS Day event here for this year. We really want to thank all our sponsors for helping us out each and every year, as they have done, most of them, and our committee also for putting this program together. So safe travels for everyone, and we look forward to seeing you next year. Stay in touch.